There it goes. Science! Welcome back to, I think we're still calling it Fraggoth Reads. Wow. If somebody has a better title, I'll take it for the year. Oh my goodness, that's hot. Yikes. So, welcome back. We are moving on to the sequel to Endymion by Dan Simmons, The Rise of Endymion. You'll notice a certain title methodology he's using, wherein you start off with name, and then for the sequel book you have Hyperion, the fall of Hyperion. Now you have Endymion and the rise of Endymion. It goes down and then it goes up. It's there's some symmetry there. A mirror image. Let's see. I can't do quite as long a one as I've been doing. Let me see how many pages I've got selected here. Alright, we're going to skip the acknowledgements, I think. Although he does call out Mystery Science Theater 3000, so maybe I will. I don't know. Okay, we can go a bit longer than that. So, as I find an adequate stopping point, I will mention that if memory serves, this starts to shake it up a little bit. In terms of, so in Endymion, the basic pattern was first you have like a intro chapter or interlude chapters occasionally where it's speaking, it's Raul Endymion trapped in a Schrodinger prison, Schrodinger's cat prison, where at some random time, from a radiation detector, a cyanide capsule will be deployed. It is inescapable. It is completely random when this will occur, but all the rest of his needs are essentially met. He's got something that's printing out a certain number of pages of microvellum or writing paper every day, and he's been writing this tale this entire time. Interspersed with that, the basic pattern or rhythm is Raul chapter, Raul Endymion chapter, then Father Captain Federico de Soya chapter. That's going to be changed up a little bit. Mostly it is going to remain Raul chapter, something else chapter, but the something else chapter is going to be a bit of a broader view. As he promised, there will be an explanation for how he knows what Federico de Soya was getting up to, and thinking and feeling at any given time. There will be an explanation for this. Whether you find that satisfying or not is a whole nother can of worms, but there will be one. It will not be for quite some time. It will not be, in fact, until basically the end of the book. It is very, very, very back heavy. Like, there's a really cool adventure road trip thing that's going on the whole way through up until a couple key points, and then it's like 100 pages from the end, it's crunch time. It might be a little less drastic than that, but that is what my memory tells me. It's still fun. It is mostly satisfying. I think overall Hyperion, the first Hyperion duology is a little stronger. But not by much, but it is stronger. This is still very good. It's very fun. As for like good road trip adventure books in the skiffy realm, sci-fi, I'd probably at some point we're going to get around to doing the Uplift series by David Brin. It's going to happen. I don't know when. Like the Culture series, I'm not going to do back to back to back to back to back because I don't know, there's like 7 books in it. It's longish. Culture is even longer. I mean, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 odd books long, if you include a short story collection in there somewhere. which maybe doesn't count, but it has a fairly long culture story in there, so I count it. I forget what that one's called. Is that State of the Art? It might be State of the Art. Not Look to Windward. There's a couple in there that I can't actually remember the plot of. It's been a minute since I've reread them all. Anyway, so what happened last time? Everything happened last time. Y'all were here for that. So there was Radamth Nemes confronted Aenea and the gang, but was entirely too cocky, but was very prepared nonetheless. So she set up a bunch of traps. She set up a bunch of monofilament wire, which took out Bettik's arm. I forget which one. Nobody else was hurt by it, though. She set up a bunch of landmines, mini claymores. None of those wind up working or having any noticeable effect on anyone. Those all get detonated when the Shrike shows up, and they go and start duking it out in slow time. She's got a bunch of little torpedo things. I think the Shrike takes those out too, or at least keeps. At least keeps them from blowing up in people's heads. So she, however, is prepared for the Shrike, and she and it go completely toe-to-toe. It is a vulgar display of power. They beat on each other very, very violently, and the fight only really ends when A, the Shrike gets damaged a bit, but B, more importantly, she's got like a chrono trap an entropic field trap that she uses on the thing that replicates the entropic fields generated by like the Sphinx and the Time Tombs. And she uses this on the Shrike and basically boots it 5 minutes into the future. That it can't do anything for those 5 minutes because it's been zapped. Zapped that way. So that leaves her a whole 5 minutes to calmly and laboriously dissect Raul, Aenea, and Bettik. Unfortunately for her, Soya is like, something's very wrong here, and I don't know what, so I'm going to wake us up stupid early. So their flesh is like barely formed on the bone. Gregorius, in fact, dies. He doesn't wake up. Whether he's permadead, we'll have to find out later. So it's only Corporal Key and spelled K-E-E, not K-E-Y, for what it's worth. It's only Corporal Key and Father Captain Federico de Soya up in the Raphael, and they get it down into the atmosphere as far as they can go to watch the action, and then they just blast Nemes from orbit. This does not, in fact, hurt her. What they do, however, is just straight up melt all the terrain around her, so she sinks into like a little lava pit, and then it like flows over her. So she's stuck. We're pretty sure she's not dead, but we don't know. And she totally does the ending of Terminator 2, except probably with a middle finger instead of a thumbs up. Like the last thing we see of Nemes, Radamth Nemes, is her hand sticking out of the lava, sinking down. So, fairly cute little bit of imagery there. Anyway, Federico de Soya contacts our good friends, Aenea, Raul, and co. through their comm which has like a small image of the ship on it, of its personality and whatnot, and basically tells them, hey, I know I've let you live. That is against orders. I am going to catch holy hell for that. But I couldn't let that monster dismantle you. Feel free to take the dropship and go. Go about your business. Go about your way. If we ever meet again, if I go back and the church doesn't excommunicate and then kill me, or kill then excommunicate, as the case may be, and they do send me to find you, I will be finding you. I will come after you, because I will have no choice. I am a man of duty. And Aenea's like, that's okay. We'll see you when we see you. So so they depart in this dropship, and they go through a Farcaster portal, and they end up in Pennsylvania, on Old Earth, or just Earth. I think they're in Pennsylvania. Anyway, they head west from there, I believe is what they were saying. Let me just double check to make sure I'm not crazy. I know, it was only a couple days ago, but I have, like, bad memory syndrome. Here we go. Just Earth, let's go in. Skibbity doop. Yes, cantilevered. Where are we? I should really find out how Loggia is pronounced. It's the second time I've had to deal with that word. Some sort of an entranceway. I don't actually know what one is off the top of my head. I have taken the odd course on architecture, but it has been a long time. I didn't get a degree in it or nothing. They did say Pennsylvania. Yes. Falling Water in western Pennsylvania. Is that a nation? Province. State, I mean, in the former United States of America, North American continent, planet Earth. So, that's where we're at. And they are headed west, I believe. Okay. Or they were headed west. Now, right after that happens, and right before the book ends, or at the final chapter of the book, is Raul back in the Schrodinger's cat box, and he gets a printout typed by Aenea, who he has indicated is dead. However that works. We'll find out more later. All right. So with that is our getting ourselves up to date. Let's get rocking and rolling with the Rise of Endymion. Before we get started, I noticed there's a comment from Sid. Oh, jeez, I can't read that. Give me a sec. Siddhartyadav 8576. The font is really small in that. I don't know why. I'll have to tweak my settings. Saying, can also do this for Wheel of Time series, please. I would if I had ever read the Wheel of Time series. It is one of the few things I have never read all the way through. I think I borrowed the first book or the second book from the library, and I've never gone back to it. Not due to disliking it, but because of being distracted. So, I'm not going to promise it, but you've added it to my list now, so I'm going to add it to the master list, which I have to actually edit anyway. There's being a do right now, I realize this. Where's my master list? Streaming resources. The list. The list. Oh, we actually got rid of Destination Void and Three Body Problem. Get out of my face. We read those. Pop, pop. Unless I have Wheel of Time in here already. Oh, and I got the Nightland done. Wheel of Time. there something else in here that I already did? Oh yeah, I did the Nightland, so we can take that off the list. I did want to do Brave New World, it's true. I should... I won't promise when that'll happen, but I can work on getting around to that, yes, at some point. Come on. How do you spell that author's name? Yes, it is Robert Jordan. I might still have a copy of one of the earlier ones. Because I have a bunch of Robert Jordan stuff, like his Conan stuff. I want to say I do have some of his Wheel of Time. No, I don't. I just have it's a big one that I've just never gotten around to. I've only read like one book out of that. I'm pretty confident. I don't know which one. Because it's been, I don't know, probably since a little while after it came out, I'd guess. So, early 90s, maybe? I don't know. Mid-90s. Been a while. Always have meant to get back into it and then just don't. Because I think I look at it and I'm like, that's daunting. Alright, yes, Robert Jordan. Let me add that to the list. Robert Jordan. Oh, Sanderson worked on some of the later ones. I can take or leave Sanderson. I know some people get upset about him, and some people adore him, and I'm just kind of right in the middle. I'm kind of like, he's aight. I don't think he's bad. I don't think he's bad at all. Oh yeah, geez, that's what, 13 volumes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Plus short story collections. An encyclopedia, of all things. At least one companion book. Oh, gosh. Tell you what. I will definitely think about it. I've added it to the list, so I have a reminder. I'm not going to promise it'll be anytime soon, but I can make the effort, but I'll have to read through it all, at least some of them first, and that's going to be the major time barrier. We'll see. If I go through my collection and see that I have one of them, if it's one of the early ones, like the first book, I might, I'll have to reread it, but I'll put that somewhere in and amongst this year. This year I intend to do mostly just kind of a big grab bag after we get through Cytine. I realize I should have saved this for the end, but it doesn't matter. We'll do it now. I should have done a big grab bag. I intend to do a big grab bag, just kind of random one-off books that I've got in my collection. Maybe stuff that's part of a series, but I'm not going to read an entire series this year. Next year, we'll see. I don't know. Mostly because my schedule is going to be a complete crapshoot, and has been for the last month and a half. So it's kind of, we'll see. And it would take me a while to read through those anyway. But I'll definitely look into it. I'll also maybe check to see who's done an audiobook of it, and if it sounds good or not. But I don't tend to actually keep an eye on that. Anyway, one sec here, let me slake my thirst. Then we'll get chipping away at the Rise of Endymion. For real this time, I promise. The Rise of Endymion by Dan Simmons. We are not stuff that abides, but patterns that perpetuate themselves. Norbert Wiener, Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. I have a copy of that, by the way. I do recommend it. It's actually pretty good. The universal nature of the universal nature out of the universal substance, as if it were wax, now molds the figure of a horse, and when it has broken this up, it uses the material for a tree, next for a man, next for something else, and each of these things subsists for a very short time. But it is no hardship for the vessel to be broken up, just as there was none in its being fastened together. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. But here is the finger of God, a flash of the will that can, existent behind all laws, that made them, and, lo, they are. And I know not if, save in this, such gift be allowed to man, that out of 3 sounds he frame, not a 4th sound, but a star. Robert Browning, Abt Vogler. If what I have said should not be plain enough, as I fear it may not be, I will but you in the place that it is deliberately mistyped there. But I will but sick you in the place where I began in this series of thoughts. I mean, I began by seeing how man was formed by circumstances. And what are circumstances but touchstones of his heart? And what are touchstones but provings of his heart? And what are the provings of his heart but fortifiers or alterers of his nature? And what is his altered nature but his soul? And what was his soul before it came into the world and had these provings and alterations and perfectionings? And intelligences without identity. And how is this identity to be made? Through the medium of the heart? And how is the heart to become this medium but in a world of circumstances? There now I think that with poetry and theology you may thank your stars that my pen is not very long-winded. John Keats, in a letter to his brother. Part 1. The Pope is dead! Long live the Pope! The cry reverberated in and around the Vatican courtyard of San Damaso, where the body of Pope Julius XIV had just been discovered in his papal apartments. The Holy Father had died in his sleep. Within minutes the word spread through the mismatched cluster of buildings still referred to as the Vatican Palace, and then moved out through the Vatican State with the speed of a circuit fire in a pure oxygen environment. The rumor of the Pope's death burned through the Vatican's office complex, leaped through the crowded St. Anne's Gate to the Apostolic Palace and the adjacent Government Palace, found waiting ears among the faithful in the sacristy of St. Peter's Basilica, to the point that the Archbishop, saying Mass, actually turned to look over his shoulder at the unprecedented hiss and whispering of the congregation, and then moved out of the Basilica with the departing worshippers into the larger crowds of St. Peter's Square, where 80 to 100,000 tourists and visiting PAX functionaries received the rumor like a critical mass of plutonium being slammed inward to full fission. There's the second time, interestingly, he has used that particular imagery. The first time was with the Shrike versus Radamth Nemes. Once out through the main vehicle gate of the Arch of Bells, the news accelerated to the speed of electrons, then leaped to the speed of light, and finally hurtled out and away from the planet at Pachem at hawking drive velocities thousands of times faster than light.
Closer, just beyond the ancient walls of the Vatican, phones and comlogs chimed throughout the hulking, sweating Castel Sant'Angelo, where the offices of the Holy Office of the Inquisition were buried deep in the mountain of stone originally built to be Hadrian's mausoleum. All that morning there was the rattle of beads and rustle of starched cassocks as Vatican functionaries rushed back to their offices to monitor their encrypted net lines and to wait for memos from above. Personal communicators rang, chimed, and vibrated in the uniforms and implants of thousands of PAX administrators, military commanders, politicians, and mercantilist officials. Within 30 minutes of the discovery of the Pope's lifeless body, news organizations around the world of Pacem were cued to the story. They readied their robotic holocams, brought their full panoply of in-system relay sats online, sent their best human reporters to the Vatican press office, and waited. In an interstellar society where the Church ruled all but absolutely, news awaited not only independent confirmation, but official permission to exist. 2 hours and 10 minutes after the discovery of Pope Julius XIV's body, the Church confirmed his death via an announcement through the office of... I can't flip the page fast enough. The Church confirmed his death via an announcement through the office of the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Lourdusame. Within seconds, the recorded announcement was typecast to every radio and holovision on the teeming world of Pacem. With its population of 1.5 billion souls, all born-again Christians carrying the cruciform, most employed by the Vatican or the huge civilian, military, or mercantile bureaucracy of the Pax state, the planet Pacem paused to listen with some interest. Even before the formal announcement, a dozen of the new Archangel-class starships had left their orbital bases and translated across the small human sphere of the galaxy arm, their near-instantaneous drives instantly killing their crews, but carrying their message of the Pope's death secure in computers and coded transponders for the 60-some most important archdiocese worlds and star systems. These Archangel courier ships would carry a few of the voting cardinals back to Pacem in time for the election, but most of the electors would choose to remain on their homeworlds, forgoing death even with its sure promise of resurrection, sending instead their encrypted interactive holo-wafers with their eligo for the next supreme pontiff. Another 85 Hawking-class Pax ships, mostly high-acceleration torch ships, made ready to spin up to relativistic velocities and then into jump configurations, their voyage time to be measured in days to months, their relative time debt ranging from weeks to years. These ships would wait in Pacem space the 15 to 20 standard days until the election of the new pope, and then bring the word to the 130-some less critical Pax systems, where archbishops tended to billions more of the faithful. Those archdiocese worlds, in turn, would be charged with sending the word of the Pope's death, resurrection, and re-election on to lesser systems, distant worlds, and to the myriad colonies in the outback. A final fleet of more than 200 unmanned courier drones was taken out of storage at the huge Pax asteroid base in Pacem system, their message chips waiting only for the official announcement of Pope Julius's rebirth and re-election before being accelerated into Hawking space to carry the news to elements of the Pax fleet engaged in patrol or combat with the ousters along the so-called Great Wall defensive sphere far beyond the boundaries of Pax space. Pope Julius had died 8 times before. The pontiff's heart was weak, and he would allow no repair of it, either by surgery or nanoplasty. It was his contention that a pope should live his natural lifespan, and, upon his death, that a new pope should be elected. The fact that this same pope had been re-elected 8 times did not dissuade him from this opinion. From his opinion, sorry. Even now, as Pope Julius's body was being readied for a formal evening of lying in state before being carried to the private resurrection chapel behind St. Peter's, cardinals and their surrogates were making preparations for the election. The Sistine Chapel was closed to tourists and made ready for the voting that would occur in less than 3 weeks. Ancient canopied stalls were brought in for the 83 cardinals who would be present in the flesh, while holographic projectors and interactive datum plane connections were set in place for the cardinals who would vote by proxy. The table for the scrutineers was set in front of the chapel's high altar. Small cards, needles, thread, a receptacle, a plate, linen cloths, and other objects were carefully placed on the table of the scrutineers and then covered with a larger linen cloth. The table for the infirmarii The table for the infirmarii and the revisers was set to one side of the altar. The main doors of the Sistine Chapel were closed, bolted, and sealed. Swiss Guard commandos in full battle armor and state-of-the-art energy weapons took their place outside the chapel doors and at the blast-proof portals of St. Peter's Papal Resurrection Annex. Following ancient protocol, the election was scheduled to occur in no fewer than 15 days, and no more than 20. Those cardinals who made their permanent home on Pacem, or within 3 weeks' time debt, travel, cancelled their regular agendas and prepared for the enclave. Everything else was in readiness. Infirmarii is spelled Infirmarii. I assume people who attend the infirmary, but official and Italian. Excuse me, schnurfling. Some fat men carry their weight like a weakness, a sign of self-indulgence and sloth. Other fat men absorb mass regally, an outward sign of their growing power. Simone Agostino Cardinal Lordusami was of the latter category. A huge man, a veritable mountain of scarlet in his formal cardinal robes, Lordusami looked to be in his late 50s standard, and had appeared thus for more than 2 centuries of active life and successful resurrection. Jowled, quite bald, and given to speaking in a soft bass rumble that could rise to a god roar capable of filling St. Peter's Basilica without the use of a speaker system, Lordusami remained the epitome of health and vitality in the Vatican. Many in the inner circles of the Church's hierarchy credited Lordusami, then a young minor functionary in the Vatican diplomatic machine, with guiding the anguished and pain-ridden ex-Hyperion pilgrim, Father Lenar Hoyt, to finding the secret that tamed the cruciform to an instrument of resurrection. They credited him as much as the newly deceased Pope for bringing the Church back from the brink of extinction. Whatever the truth of that legend, Lordusami was in fine form this first day after the Holy Father's 9th death in office, and 5 days before His Holiness's resurrection. As Cardinal Secretary of State, President of the Committee overseeing the 12 sacred congregations, and Prefect of the most feared and misunderstood of those agencies, the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, now officially known once again after more than 1,000-year interregnum as the Holy Office of the Universal Inquisition, Lordusami was the most powerful human being in the Curia. At that moment, with His Holiness Pope Julius XIV lying in state in St. Peter's Basilica, the body awaiting removal to the Resurrection Annex as soon as night should fall, Simone Agostino Cardinal Lordusami was arguably the most powerful human being in the galaxy. The fact was not lost on the Cardinal that morning.
"Are they here yet, Lucas?"
He rumbled at the man who had been his aide and factotum for more than 200 busy years. Monsignor Lucas Oddi was as thin, bony, aged-looking, and urgent in his movements as Cardinal Lordusami was huge, fleshy, ageless, and languid. Oddi's full title as Under-Secretary of State for the Vatican was... oh my gosh, come on, flip a page. Was Substitute and Secretary of the Cipher, but he was usually known as the Substitute. Cipher might have been an equally apt nickname for the tall, angular Benedictine administrator, for in the 22 decades of smooth service he had given his master, no one, Not even Lord Dusamy himself knew the man's private opinions or emotions. Father Lucas Oddi had been Lord Dusamy's strong right arm for so long that the Secretary Cardinal had long since ceased to think of him as anything but an extension of his own will.
"They have just been seated in the innermost waiting room," answered Monsignor Oddi.
Oddi. Cardinal Lord Dusamy nodded. For more than 1,000 years, since long before the Hegira that had sent humankind fleeing the dying earth and colonizing the stars, it had been a custom of the Vatican to hold important meetings in the waiting rooms of important officials rather than in their private offices. Secretary of State Cardinal Lord Dusamy's innermost waiting room was small, no more than 5 meters square, and unadorned except for a round marble table with no inset comm units, a single window that, if it had not been polarized to opaqueness, would have looked out onto a marvelously frescoed external loggia. And 2 paintings. Loggia? I'm still not sure what that is. I should really look that up. Let me get to the end of this paragraph and we'll do that, because it's been long enough. I've now run into it 3 times. Secretary of State Cardinal Lord Dusamy's innermost waiting room was small, no more than 5 meters square, and unadorned except for a round marble table with no inset comm units, a single window that, if it had not been polarized to opaqueness, would have looked out onto a marvelously frescoed external loggia, and 2 paintings by the 30th century genius Caro Tan, one showing Christ's agony in Gethsemane, the other showing Pope Julius, in his pre-papal identity of Father Lenar Hoyt, receiving the first cruciform from a powerful but androgynous-looking archangel, while Satan, in the form of the Shrike, looked on powerlessly. So let's look up what a loggia is, and see if we can figure out how to pronounce that, even though this is probably the last time I'll ever see the word. Until the next time that I read this book in my own time. Give me one moment here. There will probably be an interruption in service. Loggia is a covered exterior gallery or corridor typically built into the main structure of a building at ground or upper levels, featuring an open column-supported side. Yeah, I've seen these before. I didn't know that's what they were called. Okay, how is that pronounced? Let's find out. Loggia. Loggia. Let's find another. It could be loggia as well. Interesting. Okay. The definition of a Roman loggia. The main difference between a loggia and a portico is the role within the functional layout of the building. The portico allows entrance to the inside from the exterior and can be found on vernacular and small-scale buildings. Thus, it is found mainly on noble residences and public buildings. A classic use of both is that represented in the mosaics of Basilica of Sant'Apollinare Nuovo of the Royal Palace. Anyway. I have seen these before. Loggia. Loggia. My only concern today is if I have to pronounce the word Taliesin, that I actually pronounce it correctly, because looking at it, it don't look like how it's spelled. Actually, it does, but you have to assume every single letter is its own syllable. You have to turn on your Japanese brain for a sec. Okay, back on track. The 4 people in the waiting room, 3 men and a woman, represented the Executive Council of the The 4 people in the waiting room, 3 men and a woman, represented the Executive Council of the Pan-Capitalist League of Independent Catholic Transstellar Trade Organizations, more commonly known as the Pax Mercantilis. Mercantilis? Unfortunately, we're going to be using that word a lot, so I better settle on a pronunciation. So for the record, that organization is called the Executive Council of the Pan-Capitalist League of Independent Catholic Transstellar Trade Organizations. Every single word of that, except for of the, is as a capital letter. So it is the ECPLICTTO. It is too long a name, and that's why they called it the Pax Mercantilis. Mercantilis? Mercantilis. I'm going to use those all interchangeably, and if somebody has a better idea than that, then speak now or forever hold your Reese's Pieces or something. Two of the men might have been father and son, M. Helvig Aron and M. Kenneth Hay Modino. Alike, even to their subtle, expensive cape suits, expensive, conservative haircuts, subtly biosculpted Old Earth North Euro features, and to the even more subtle red pins showing their membership in the Sovereign Military Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, of Rhodes, and of Malta, the ancient society popularly known as the Knights of Malta. The third man was of Asian descent and wore a simple cotton robe. His name was Kenzo Isozaki, and he was this day, after Simone Augustino Cardinal Lordusimi, arguably the second most powerful human in the Pax. The final Pax Mercantilis representative, a woman in her 50s, standard, with carelessly cropped dark hair and a pinched face, wearing an inexpensive worksuit of combed fiber plastic, was M. Annapelli Cognani. Jeez Louise. I told myself I wasn't going to trip on that, but I did. Cognani. M. Annapelli Cognani. Reputedly, Isozaki's heir apparent and rumored for years to be the lover of the female Archbishop of Renaissance Vector. Ow, ow! The four rose and bowed slightly as Cardinal Lordusimi entered and took his place at the table. Monsignor Lucas Oddi was the only bystander, and he stood away from the table, his bony hands clasped in front of his cassock, the tortured eyes of Caro Tan's Christ in Gethsemane peering over his black-frocked shoulder at the small assembly. M's Aaron and Hay Modino Modhino? M-O-D-H-I-N-O. Hay, H-A-Y hyphen M-O-D-H-I-N-O. Modhino. Whatever. Modino? M's Aaron and Hay Modino moved forward to genuflect and kiss the cardinal's beveled sapphire ring, but Lordusimi waved away further protocol before Kenzo Isozaki or the woman could approach. When the four Pax Mercantilis representatives were seated once again... Mercantilis? I'm going to question myself every time. Maybe I'll rotate. Every single time I do it, I'll do it differently. When the four Pax Mercantilis representatives were seated once again, the cardinal said,
We are all old friends. You know that while I represent the Holy See in this discussion during the Holy Father's temporary absence, any and all things discussed this day shall remain within these walls.
Lordusimi smiled.
And these walls, my friends, are the most secure and bug-proof in the Pax.
Aaron and Hay Modino smiled tightly. M. Isozaki's pleasant expression did not change. M. Annapelli Cognani's frown deepened. Your Eminence, she said, may I speak freely? Lordusimi extended a pudgy palm. He had always distrusted people who asked to speak freely, or who vowed to speak candidly, or who used the expression frankly. He said,
Of course, my dear friend. I regret that the pressing circumstances of the day allow us so little time.
Annapelli Cognani nodded tersely. She had understood the command to be precise. Your Eminence, she said, we asked for this conference so that we could speak to you not only as loyal members of His Holiness's Pan-Capitalist League, but as friends of the Holy See and of yourself. Lordusimi nodded affably. His thin lips between the jowls were curled in a slight smile.
Of course.
M. Helvig Aron cleared his throat.
Your Eminence, the Mercantilis has an understandable interest in the coming papal election.
The cardinal waited.
Our goal today, continued M. Hay Modino, is to reassure your Eminence, both as Secretary of State and as a potential candidate for the papacy, that the League will continue to carry out the Vatican's policy with the utmost loyalty after the coming election.
Cardinal Lordusimi nodded ever so slightly. He understood perfectly. Somehow, the Pax Mercantilis, Isozaki's intelligence network, had sniffed out a possible insurrection in the Vatican hierarchy. Somehow they had overheard the most silent of whispers in whisper-proof rooms such as this, that it had come time to replace Pope Julius with a new pontiff. And Isozaki knew that Simone Augustino Lordusimi would be that man.
In this sad interregnum, M. Cognani was continuing, we felt it our duty to offer private as well as public assurances that the League will continue serving the interests of the Holy See and the Holy Mother Church, just as it has for more than 2 standard centuries.
Cardinal Lordusimi nodded again and waited, but nothing else was forthcoming from the 4 mercantilist leaders. For a moment, he allowed himself to speculate on why Isozaki had come in person.
To see my reaction rather than the reports of his subordinates, he thought. The old man trusts his senses and insights over anyone and anything else.
Lordusimi smiled.
Good policy.
He let another minute of silence stretch before speaking.
My friends, he rumbled at last, you cannot know how it warms my heart to have 4 such busy and important people visit this poor priest in our time of shared sorrow.
Isozaki and Cognani remained expressionless, as inert as argon, but the cardinal could see the poorly hidden glint of anticipation in the eyes of the other 2 mercantilist men. If Lordusimi welcomed their support at this juncture, however subtly, it put the mercantilists on an even level with the Vatican conspirators, made the mercantilis a welcomed conspirator and de facto co-equal to the next pope. Lordusimi leaned closer to the table. The cardinal noticed that M. Kenzo Isozaki had not blinked during the entire exchange.
My friends, he continued, as good born-again Christians,
he nodded toward M's Aaron and Hey Modino,
as Knights Hospitaller, you undoubtedly know the procedure for the election of our next pope. But let me refresh your memory. Once the cardinals and their interactive counterparts are gathered and sealed in the Sistine Chapel, there are ways in which we can elect a pope: by acclamation, by delegation, or by scrutiny. Though through acclamation all of the cardinal electors are moved by the Holy Spirit to proclaim one person as supreme pontiff, we each cry, Eligo, I elect, and the name of the person we unanimously select. Through delegation, we choose a few of those among us, say a dozen cardinals, to make the choice for all. Through scrutiny, the cardinal electors vote secretly until a candidate receives 2/3 majority plus 1. Then the new pope is elected, and the waiting billions see the sfumata, the puffs of white smoke, which means that the family of the church once again has a Holy Father.
The 4 representatives of the Pax Mercantilis sat in silence. Each of them was intimately aware of the procedure for electing a pope, not only of the antiquated mechanisms, of course, but of the politicking, pressuring, deal-making, bluffing, and outright blackmail that had often accompanied the process over the centuries. And they began to understand why Cardinal Lordusimi was emphasizing the obvious now.
For the last 9 elections, continued the huge cardinal, his voice a heavy rumble, the Pope has been elected by acclamation, by the direct intercession of the Holy Spirit.
Lordusimi paused for a long, thick moment. Behind him, Monsignor Oddi stood watching, as motionless as the painted Christ behind him, as unblinking as Kenzo Isozaki.
I have no reason to believe, continued Lordusimi at last, that this election will be any different.
The Pax Mercantilis executives did not move. Finally, M. Isozaki bowed his head ever so slightly. The message had been heard and understood. There would be no insurrection within the Vatican walls. Or, if there were, Lordusimi had it well in hand and did not need the support of the Pax Mercantilis. If the former were the case, and Cardinal Lordusimi's time had not yet come, Pope Julius would once again oversee the Church and Pax. Isozaki's group had taken a terrible risk because of the incalculable rewards and power that would be theirs if they had succeeded in allying themselves with the future pontiff. Now they faced only the consequences of the terrible risk. A century earlier, Pope Julius had excommunicated Kenzo Isozaki's predecessor for a lesser miscalculation, revoking the sacrament of the cruciform and condemning the mercantilist leader to a life of separation from the Catholic community, which, of course, was every man, woman, and child on Pacem and on a majority of the Pax worlds, followed by the true death.
Now I regret that pressing duties must take me from your kind company, rumbled the cardinal.
Before he could rise, and contrary to standard protocol for leaving the presence of a prince of the church, M. Isozaki came forward quickly, genuflected, and kissed the cardinal's ring.
Eminence,
murmured the old Pax Mercantilis billionaire. This time, Lord Dusamy did not rise or leave until each of the powerful CEOs had come forward to show his or her respect. An Archangel-class starship translated into God's Grove space the day after Pope Julius's death. This was the only Archangel not assigned to courier duty. It was smaller than the new ships, and it was called the Raphael. Minutes after the Archangel established orbit around the ash-colored world, a dropship separated and screamed into the atmosphere. 2 men and a woman were aboard. The 3 looked like siblings, united by their lean forms, pale complexions, dark, limp, short-cropped hair, hooded gazes, and thin lips. They wore unadorned shipsuits of red and black with elaborate wristband comlogs. Their presence in the dropship was a curiosity. The Archangel-class starships invariably killed human beings during their violent transition through Planck space, and the onboard resurrection crashes usually took 3 days to revive the human crew. These 3 were not human. Morphing wings and smoothing all surfaces into an aerodynamic shell, the dropship crossed the Terminator into daylight at Mach 3. Beneath it turned the former Templar world of God's Grove, a mass of burn scars, ash fields, mud flows, retreating glaciers, and green sequoias struggling to reseed themselves in the shattered landscape. Slowing now to subsonic speeds, the dropship flew above the narrow band of temperate climate and viable vegetation near the planet's equator and followed a river to the stump of the former world tree. 83 kilometers across, still a kilometer high even in its devastated form, the stump rose above the southern horizon like a black mesa. The dropship avoided the world stump and continued to follow the river west, continuing to descend until it landed on a boulder near the point where the river entered a narrow gorge. The 2 men and the woman came down the extruded stairs and reviewed the scene. It was mid-morning on this part of God's Grove. The river made a rushing noise as it entered the rapids. Birds and unseen arboreals chittered in the thick trees farther downriver. The air smelled of pine needles, unclassifiable alien scents, wet soil, and ash. More than 2.5 centuries earlier, this world had been smashed and slashed from orbit. Those 200-meter-high Templar trees that did not flee to space had burned in a conflagration that continued to rage for the better part of a century, extinguished at last only by a nuclear winter.
"Careful," said one of the men as the 3 walked downhill to the river. "The monofilaments she webbed here should still be in place."
The thin woman nodded and removed a laser weapon from the flow foam pack she carried. Setting the beam to widest dispersal, she fanned it over the river. Invisible filaments glowed like a spider's web in morning dew, crisscrossing the river and wrapping around boulders, submerging and re-emerging from the white frothed water.
"None where we have to work,"
said the woman as she shut off the laser. The three crossed a low area by the river and climbed a rocky slope. Here the granite had been melted and flowed downhill like lava during the slagging of God's Grove, but on one of the terraced rock faces there were even more recent signs of catastrophe. Near the top of a boulder 10 meters above the river, a crater had been burned into solid rock. Perfectly circular, indented half a meter below the level of the boulder, the crater was 5 meters across. On the southeast side, where a waterfall of molten rock had run and splattered and fountained to the river below, a natural staircase of black stone had formed. The rock filling the circular cavity on top of the boulder was darker and smoother than the rest of the stone, looking like polished onyx set in a granite crucible. One of the men stepped into the concavity, lay full length on the smooth stone, and set his ear to the rock. A second later he rose and nodded to the other two. "Stand back," said the woman. She touched her wristband comlog. The three had taken 5 steps back when the lance of pure energy burned from space. Birds and arboreals fled in loud panic through the screening trees. The air ionized and became superheated in seconds, rolling a shockwave in all directions. Branches and leaves burst into flame 50 meters from the beam's point of contact. The cone of pure brilliance exactly matched the diameter of the circular depression in the boulder, turning the smooth stone into a lake of molten fire. The 2 men and the women did not flinch. Their ship suits smoldered in the open hearth furnace heat, but the special fabric did not burn. Neither did their flesh. "Time," said the woman over the roar of the energy beam and widening firestorm. The golden beam ceased to exist. Hot air rushed in at gale-force winds to fill the vacuum. The depression in the rock was a circle of bubbling lava. One of the men went to one knee and seemed to be listening. Then he nodded to the others and phase-shifted. 1 second he was flesh and bone and blood and skin and hair. The next he was a chrome-silver sculpture in the form of a man. The blue sky, burning forest, and lake of molten fire reflected perfectly on his shifting silver skin. He plunged one arm into the molten pool, crouched lower, reached deeper, and then pulled back. The silver form of his hand looked as if it had melted onto the surface of another silver human form, this one a woman. The male chrome sculpture pulled the female chrome sculpture out of the hissing, spitting cauldron of lava and carried it 50 meters to a point where the grass was not burning and the stone was cool enough to hold their weight. The other man and woman followed. The man shifted out of his chrome-silver form, and a second later the female he had carried did the same. The woman who emerged from the quicksilver looked like a twin of the short-haired woman in the ship suit.
"Where is the bitch child?"
asked the rescued female. She had once been known as Radamanth Nemes. So, here it does have the extra A, which is what I thought it was, but in the previous book... Okay, every single one of these has Radamanth. So in the previous one, it is always Radamanth. And I knew in my gut it was Radamanth, and I should have persisted with that. And I'm sorry. "Gone," said the man who rescued her. He and his male sibling could be her brothers or male clones. "They made the final Farcaster." Radamanth Nemes grimaced slightly. She was flexing her fingers and moving her arms as if recovering from cramps in her limbs.
"At least I killed the damned android."
"No," said the other woman, her twin. She had no name.
"They left in the Raphael's dropship. The android lost an arm, but the autosurgeon kept him alive."
Nemes nodded and looked back at the rocky hillside where lava still ran. The glow from the fire showed the glistening web of the monofilament over the river. Behind them, the forest burned.
"That was not pleasant in there. I couldn't move with the full force of the ship's lance burning down on me, and then I could not phase shift with the rock around me. It took immense concentration to power down and still maintain an active phase shift interface. How long was I buried there?"
4 Earth years.
said the man who had not spoken until now. Radamanth Nemes raised a thin eyebrow, more in question than surprise.
Yet the core knew where I was.
The core knew where you were, said the other woman. Her voice and facial expressions were identical to those of the rescued woman.
And the core knew that you had failed.
Nemes smiled very thinly.
So the 4 years were a punishment.
A reminder, said the man who had pulled her from the rock. Radamanth Nemes took 2 steps, as if testing her balance. Her voice was flat.
So why have you come for me now?
The girl, said the other woman.
She is coming back. We are to resume your mission.
Nemes nodded. I assume it's Nemes like Nemesis, and not Nemes, because it is pronounced N-E-M-E-S, so it could be Nemes. And that would be hilarious, but Nemes, I think, is more appropriate. Radamanth has some either biblical or other significance that I can't remember off the top of my head. The man who had rescued her set his hand on her thin shoulder.
And please consider, he said, that 4 years entombed in fire and stone will be nothing to what you may expect if you fail again.
Nemes stared at him for a long moment without answering. Then, turning away from the lava and flames in a precisely choreographed motion, matching stride for stride, all 4 of them moved in perfect unison toward the dropship. On the desert world of Madre de Dios, on the high plateau called the Llano Estacado because of the atmosphere generator pylons crisscrossing the desert in neat 10-kilometer grid intervals, Father Federico de Soya prepared for early morning mass. The little desert town of Nuevo Atlan held fewer than 300 residents, mostly Pax bauxite miners waiting to die before traveling home, mixed with a few of the converted Mariaists who scratched out livings as Korgor herders in the toxic wastelands. And Father de Soya knew precisely how many would be in chapel for early mass. 4. Old M. Sanchez, the ancient widow who is rumored to have murdered her husband in a dust storm 62 years before, the Perel twins who, for unknown reasons, preferred the old run-down church to the spotless and air-conditioned company chapel on the mining reservation, and the mysterious old man with the radiation-scarred face who knelt in the rearmost pew and never took communion. There was a dust storm blowing. There was always a dust storm blowing, and Father de Soya had to run the last 30 meters from his adobe parish house to the church sacristy, a transparent fiberplastic hood over his head and shoulders to protect his cassock and biretta, his breviary tucked deep in his cassock pocket to keep it clean. It did not work. Every evening when he removed his cassock or hung his biretta on a hook, the sand fell out in a red cascade, like dried blood from a broken hourglass. And every morning when he opened his breviary, sand gritted between the pages and soiled his fingers. "Good morning, Father," said Pablo as the priest hurried into the sacristy and slid the cracked weather seals around the doorframe. "Good morning, Pablo, my most faithful altar boy," said Father de Soya. Actually, the priest silently corrected himself. Pablo was his only altar boy. A simple child. Simple in the ancient sense of the word, as mentally slow, as well as in the sense of being honest, sincere, loyal, and friendly. Pablo was there to help de Soya serve Mass every weekday morning at 0630 hours, and twice on Sunday, although only the same 4 people came to the early morning Sunday Mass, and half a dozen of the bauxite miners to the later Mass. The boy nodded his head and grinned again, the smile disappearing for a moment as he pulled on his clean, starched surplice over his altar boy robes. Father de Soya walked past the child, ruffling his dark hair as he did so, and opened the tall vestment chest. The morning had grown as dark as the high desert night. The morning had grown as dark as the high desert night, as the dust storm swallowed the sunrise, and the only illumination in the cold, bare room was from the fluttering sacristy lamp. Sacristy? Whatever. De Soya genuflected, prayed earnestly for a moment, and began donning the vestments of his profession. For 2 decades, as Father Captain de Soya of the Pax Fleet, commander of torch ships such as the Balthazar, Federico de Soya had dressed himself in uniforms where the cross and collar were the only signs of his priesthood. He had worn Plaskev battle armor, spacesuits, tactical comm implants, datum plane goggles, god gloves, all of the paraphernalia of a torch ship captain, but none of those items touched him and moved him as much as these simple vestments of a parish priest. In the 4 years since Father Captain de Soya had been stripped of his rank of captain and removed from fleet service, he had rediscovered his original vocation. De Soya pulled on the De Soya pulled on the amice that slipped over his head like a gown and fell to his ankles. The amice was white linen and immaculate despite the incessant dust storms, as was the alb that slid on next. He set the cincture around his waist, whispering a prayer as he did so. Then he raised the white stole from the vestment chest, held it reverently a moment in both hands, and then placed it around his neck, crossing the 2 strips of silk. Behind him, Pablo was bustling around the little room, putting away his filthy outside boots and pulling on the cheap fiber-plastic running shoes his mother had told him to keep here just for Mass. Father de Soya set his tunicle in place, the outer garment showing a T-cross in front. It was white with a subtle purple piping. He would be saying a massive benediction this morning while quietly administering the sacrament of penance for the presumed widow and murderer in front pew, and the radiation-scarred cipher in the last pew. Pablo bustled up to him. The boy was grinning and out of breath. Father de Soya set his hand on the boy's head, trying to flatten the thatch of flyaway hair while also calming and reassuring the lad. De Soya lifted the chalice, removed his right hand from the boy's head to hold it over the veiled cup, and said softly, "All right." Pablo's grin disappeared as the gravity of the moment swept over him, and then the boy led the procession of 2 out of the sacristy door toward the altar. De Soya noticed at once that there were 5 figures in the chapel, not 4. The usual worshippers were there, all kneeling and standing. I'm going to redo all that with better emphasis on the proper syllable. De Soya noticed at once there were 5 figures in the chapel, not 4. The usual worshippers were there, all kneeling and standing and then kneeling again in their usual places, but there was someone else, someone tall and silent, standing in the deepest shadows where the little foyer entered the nave. All during the renewed Mass, the presence of the stranger pulled at Father de Soya's consciousness, try as he might to block out all but the sacred mystery of which he was part. "Dominus vobiscum," said Father de Soya. For more than 3,000 years, he believed, the Lord had been with them, with all of them. Et cum spiritu tuo, said Father de Soya. And as Pablo echoed the words, the priest turned his head slightly to see if the light had illuminated the tall, thin form in the dark recess at the front of the nave. It had not. During the canon, Father de Soya forgot the mysterious figure and succeeded in focusing all his attention on the host that he raised in his blunt figures. Hoc est enim corpus meum, the Jesuit pronounced distinctly, feeling the power of those words and praying for the 10,000th time that his sins of violence while a fleet captain might be washed away by the blood and mercy of this Savior. At the communion rail, only the Perel twins came forward, as always. De Soya said the words and offered the host to the young men. He resisted the urge to glance up at the figure in the shadows at the back of the church. The Mass ended almost in darkness. The howl of wind drowned out the last prayers and responses. This little church had no electricity, it never had, and the 10 flickering candles on the wall did little to pierce the gloom. Father de Soya gave the final benediction, and then carried the chalice into the dark sacristy, setting it on the smaller altar there. Pablo hurried to shrug out of his surplice and pull on his storm anorak. "See you tomorrow, Father." "Yes, thank you, Pablo. Don't forget." Too late. The boy was out the door and running for the spice mill where he worked with his father and uncles. Red dust filled the air around the faulty, weather-stripped door. Normally, Father de Soya would have been pulling off his vestments now, setting them back in the vestment chest. Later in the day, he would take them to the parish house to clean them. But this morning he stayed in the tunicle and stole, the alb and cincture and amice. For some reason he felt he needed them, much as he had needed the Plazkev battle armor during the boarding operations in the Coalsack campaign. The tall figure, still in the shadows, stood in the sacristy doorway. Father de Soya waited and watched, resisting the urge to cross himself or to hold the remaining communion wafer up as if to shield against vampires or the devil. Outside, the wind went from a howl to a banshee scream. The figure took a step into the ruby light cast by the sacristy lamp. De Soya recognized Captain Margaret Wu, personal aide and liaison for Admiral Marusin, commanding officer of Pax fleet. For the second time that morning, de Soya corrected himself. It was Admiral Margaret Wu now, the pips on her collar just visible in the red light. "Father Captain de Soya," said the Admiral. The Jesuit slowly shook his head. It was only 0730 hours on this 23-hour world, but already he felt tired. "Just Father de Soya," he said. "Father Captain de Soya," repeated Admiral Wu, and this time there was no question in her voice. "You are hereby recalled to active service. You will take 10 minutes to gather your belongings and then come with me. The recall is effective now." Federico de Soya sighed and closed his eyes. He felt like crying. "Please, dear Lord, let this cup pass from me." When he opened his eyes, the chalice was still on the altar, and Admiral Margaret Wu was still waiting. "Yes," he said softly, and slowly, carefully, he began removing his sacred vestments. On the third day after the death and entombment of Pope Julius XIV, there was movement in his resurrection creche. The slender umbilicals and subtle machine probes slid back and out of sight. The corpse on the slab at first lay inanimate, except for the rise and fall of a bare chest, and then visibly twitched, then moaned, and, after many long minutes, raised itself to one elbow, and eventually sat up, the richly embroidered silk and linen shroud sliding around the naked man's waist. For several minutes the man sat on the edge of the marble slab, his head in his shaking hands. Then he looked up as a secret panel in the Resurrection Chapel wall slid back with less than a hiss. A cardinal in formal red moved across the dimly lit space with a rustle of silk and a rattle of beads. Next to him walked a tall, handsome man with gray hair and gray eyes. This man was dressed in a simple but elegant one-piece suit of gray flannel. 3 steps behind the cardinal and the man came 3 steps behind the cardinal and the man in gray came 2 Swiss Guard troopers in medieval orange and black. They carried no weapons. The naked man on the slab blinked as if his eyes were unaccustomed to even the muted light in the dim chapel. Finally, the eyes focused. "Lord Ducemy," said the resurrected man.
"Father de Ray,"
said Cardinal Lord Ducemy. He was carrying an oversized silver chalice. The naked man moved his mouth and tongue as if he had awakened with a vile taste in his mouth. He was an older man with a thin, ascetic face, sad eyes, and old scars across his newly resurrected body. On his chest, 2 cruciforms glowed red and tumescent. "What year is it?" he asked at last.
"The year of our Lord 3131,
said the cardinal, still standing next to the seated man. Father Paul de Ray closed his eyes.
57 years.
57 years after my last resurrection. 279 years since the fall of the farcasters.
He opened his eyes and looked at the cardinal.
270 years since you poisoned me, killing Pope Teilhard the First.
Cardinal Lord Dusamy rumbled a laugh.
You recover quickly from resurrection disorientation, if you can do your arithmetic so well.
Father Duray moved his gaze from the cardinal to the tall man in grey.
Albedo, you come to witness, or do you have to give courage to your tame Judas?
The tall man said nothing. Cardinal Lord Dusamy's already thin lips tightened to the point of disappearance between florid jowls.
Do you have anything else to say before you return to hell, anti-pope?
Not to you,
murmured Father Duray, and closed his eyes in prayer. The two Swiss Guard troopers seized Father Duray's thin arms. The Jesuit did not resist. One of the troopers grabbed the resurrected man by the brow and pulled his head back, stretching the thin neck in a bow. Bow. Cardinal Lord Dusamy took a graceful half-step closer. From the folds of his silken sleeve snicked a knife blade with a horn handle. While the troopers held the still passive Duray, whose Adam's apples seemed to grow more prominent as his head was forced back, Lord Dusamy swept his arm up and around in a fluid, casting-away gesture. Blood spurted from Duray's severed carotid artery. Stepping back to avoid staining his robes, Lord Dusamy slid the blade back into his sleeve, raised the broad-mouthed chalice, and caught the pulsing stream of blood. When the chalice was almost filled and the blood had ceased spurting, he nodded to the Swiss Guard trooper, who immediately released Father Duray's head. The resurrected man was a corpse once again, head lolling, eyes still shut, mouth open, the slashed throat gaping like painted lips on a terrible, ragged grin. The two Swiss Guard troopers arranged the body on the slab and lifted the shroud away. The naked dead man looked pale and vulnerable. Torn throat, scarred chest, long white fingers, pale belly, flaccid genitals, scrawny legs. Death, even in an age of resurrection, leaves little or no dignity, even to those who have lived lives of sustained self-control. While the troopers held the beautiful shroud out of harm's way, Cardinal Lord Dusamy poured the heavy chalice's blood onto the dead man's chest. Cardinal Lord Dusamy poured the heavy chalice's blood onto the dead man's eyes, into his gaping mouth, into the raw knife wound, and down the chest, belly, and groin of the corpse, the spreading scarlet matching and surpassing the intensity of color in the cardinal's robes.
Sie aber seid nicht fleißlich, sondern geistlich,
said Cardinal Lord Dusamy.
You are not made of flesh, but of spirit.
The tall man raised an eyebrow.
Bach, isn't it?
Of course, said the cardinal, setting the now empty chalice next to the corpse. He nodded to the Swiss Guard troopers, and they covered the body with the two-layered shroud. Blood immediately soaked the beautiful fabrics.
Jesu, meine Freunde,
added Lord Dusamy.
Jesu, meine Freude,
added Lord Dusamy.
I thought so,
said the taller man. He gave the cardinal a questioning look.
Yes,
agreed Cardinal Lord Dusamy.
Now.
The man in grey walked around the bier and stood behind the two troopers, who were completing their tucking in of the blood-soaked shroud. When the troopers straightened and stepped back from the marble slab, the man in grey lifted his large hands to the back of each man's neck. The troopers' eyes and mouths opened wide, but they had no time to cry out. Within a second, their open eyes and mouths blazed with an incandescent light. Their skin became translucent to the orange flame within their bodies, and then they were gone, volatilized, scattered to particles finer than ash. The man in grey brushed his hands together to rid them of their thin layer of micro-ash.
"Oh, pity, Councillor Albedo,"
murmured Cardinal Lord Dusamy in his thick rumble of a voice. The man in gray looked at the suggestion of airborne dust settling in the dim light, and then back at the cardinal. His eyebrow rose once again in query.
No, 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 rumbled Lord Dusamy. I mean the shroud. The stains will never come out. We have to weave a new one after every resurrection.
He turned and started toward the secret panel, his robes rustling.
Come, Albedo. We need to talk, and I still have a Mass of Thanksgiving to say before noon.
After the panel slid shut behind the two, the resurrection chamber lay silent and empty, except for the shrouded corpse and the slightest hint of gray fog in the dim light, a shifting, fading mist suggestive of the departing souls of the more recent dead. I don't think that last thing from Lord Dusamy is necessarily played off as intended to be comedic, but it definitely is kind of hilarious. Because Albedo's like, wait, you're worried about the two guys I just zapped? And, yes, by the way, welcome back to Counselor Albedo. He's back! What I always imagine with Albedo is, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the, I hesitate to call it religion, but the cult or church of the subgenius. I always think of Bob Dobbs, their patron saint, as it were. Their Jesus figure, if you will, who's this guy kind of in a business suit. So I always think of that character when I think of Counselor Albedo. So he's back. We knew the Technocore was around still. We didn't know he was. But yeah, Lord Dusamy is just upset that the shroud got stained with blood. Two guys dead, who cares about them?
Damn it, we have to make a new one every time.
Excuse me. 2. On the week that Pope Julius died for the 9th time and Father de Rey was murdered for the 5th time, Aenea and I were 160,000 light-years away on the kidnapped planet Earth. Old Earth, the real Earth, circling a G-type star that was not the Sun in the Lesser Magellanic Cloud, a galaxy that was not the Earth's home galaxy. It had been a strange week for us. We did not know that the Pope had died, of course, since there was no contact between this relocated Earth and Pax Space except for the dormant Farcaster portals. Actually, I know now, Aenea was aware of the Pope's demise through means we did not suspect then, but she did not mention events in Pax Space to us, and no one thought to ask her. Our lives on Earth during those years of exile were simple and peaceful and profound in ways that are now hard to fathom and almost painful to recall. At any rate, that particular week had been profound but not simple or peaceful for us. The old architect with whom Aenea had been studying for the last 4 years had died on Monday, and his funeral had been a sad and hasty affair out on the desert that wintry Tuesday evening. On Wednesday, Aenea had turned 16, but the event was overshadowed by the pall of grief and confusion at the Taliesin Fellowship, and only A. Bettik and I had tried to celebrate the day with her. So, for anyone wondering... Oh, and hello, thanks for tuning in, Optical Antenna. For anyone wondering, Taliesin is spelled Taliesin. So it looks like Taliesin, but it's Taliesin. I did have to look that up. Thank you very much. I think it's Gaelic or Celtic. I don't remember what it means, but it is a word or name that Lloyd Wright liked and used a couple times. The android had baked a chocolate cake, Aenea's favorite. She has good taste. And I had worked for days to whittle an elaborately carved walking stick out of a sturdy branch we had found during one of the old architect's compulsory picnic expeditions to the nearby mountains. That evening we ate the cake and drank some champagne in Aenea's beautiful little apprentice shelter in the desert, but she was subdued and distracted by the old man's death and the fellowship's panic. I realize now that much of her distraction must have come from her awareness of the Pope's death, of the violent events that were gathering on the future's horizon, and of the end of what would be the most peaceful 4 years we would ever know together. I remember the conversation that evening of Aenea's 16th birthday. It had grown dark early, and the air was chill. Outside the comfortable stone and canvas home she had built 4 years earlier for her apprenticeship challenge, the dust was blowing, and the sagebrush and yucca plants rasped and contorted in the wind's grip. We sat by the hissing lantern, traded our champagne glasses for mugs of warm tea, and talked softly beneath the hiss of sand on canvas. "It's strange," I said. "We knew he was old and ill, but no one seemed to believe that he would die." I was speaking of the old architect, of course, not of the distant pope who meant so little to us. And, like all of us on the exiled earth, Aenea's mentor had not carried the cruciform. His death was final in the way the pope's could not be. "He seemed to know," Aenea said softly. "He's been calling in each of his apprentices for the past month, imparting some last bit of wisdom." "What last bit of wisdom did he share with you?" I asked. "I mean, if it's not a secret or too personal." Aenea smiled over the steaming mug of tea. "He reminded me that the patron will always agree to pay twice what the bid was if you send along the extra expenses bit by bit once construction has started and the structure is taking shape. He said that was beyond the point of no return, so the client was hooked like a trout on a 6-pound line." Both Bettik and I laughed. It was not a disrespectful laugh. The old architect had been one of those rare creatures, a true genius combined with an overpowering personality. But even when thinking of him with sadness and affection, we could recognize the selfishness and deviousness that had also been a part of his personality. And I don't mean to be coy here by referring to him only as the old architect. The Cybrid's personality template had been reconstructed from a pre-Hegera human named Frank Lloyd Wright, who had worked in the 19th and 20th centuries AD. But while everyone at the Taliesin Fellowship had referred to him respectfully as Mr. Wright, including even those older apprentices who were his age, I had always thought of him as the old architect because of things Aenea had said about her future mentor before we came here to Old Earth. As if thinking along these same lines, Bettik said, "It's odd, isn't it?" "What's that?" said Aenea. The android smiled and rubbed his left arm where it ended at a smooth stump just below the elbow. It is a habit he had developed over the past few years. The autosurgeon on the dropship that had carried us through the Farcaster from Godsgrove had kept the android alive, but his chemistry had been sufficiently different to prevent the ship from growing him a new arm. "I mean," he said, "that despite the ascendancy of the Church in the affairs of humankind, the question of whether human beings have a soul which leaves the body after death has yet to be definitely answered. Yet in Mr. Wright's case, we know that his cybrid personality still exists, separate from his body, or at least did for some time after the moment of his death." "Do we know that for sure?" I said. The tea was warm and good. Aenea and I bought it, traded for it actually, at the Indian market located in the desert where the city of Scottsdale should have been.
Should have been.
It was Aenea who answered my question. "Yes, my father's cybrid personality survived the destruction of his body and was stored in the Shrone Loop in Mother's skull. Even after that, we know that it had a separate existence in the Megasphere, and then resided in the consul's ship for a time. A cybrid's personality survives as a sort of holistic wavefront propagated along the matrices of the datum plane or megasphere until it returns to the AI source in the core." I had known this, but never understood it. "Okay," I said, "but where did Mr. Wright's AI-based personality wavefront go? There can't be any connections to the core out here in the Magellanic Cloud. There are no data spheres here." Aenea set down her empty mug. "There has to be a connection, or Mr. Wright and the other reconstructed cybrid personalities assembled here on Earth couldn't have existed. Remember, the Technocore used the blank space between the Farcaster portals as their medium and hiding place before the dying hegemony destroyed the Farcaster openings to it." "The void which binds," I said, repeating the phrase from the old poet's cantos. "Yeah," said Aenea, "although I always thought that was a dumb name." "Whatever it's called," I said, "I don't understand how it can reach here. a different galaxy.
The medium the core used for farcasters reaches everywhere, said Aenea. It permeates space and time.
My young friend frowned.
No, that's not right. Space and time are bound up in it. The void which binds transcends space and time.
I looked around. The lantern light was enough to fill the little tent structure, but outside it was dark and the wind howled. Then the core can reach here? Aenea shook her head. We had held this discussion before. I had not understood the concept then. I did not understand it now.
These cybrids are connected to AIs which aren't really part of the core, she said. Mr. Wright's persona wasn't. My father, the second Keats cybrid, wasn't.
This was the part I had never understood. The Cantos said that the Keats cybrids, including your father, were created by Uman, a core AI. Uman told your father that the cybrids were a core experiment. Aenea stood and walked to the opening of her apprentice shelter. The canvas on either side rippled with the wind, but kept its shape and held the sand outside. She had built it well.
Uncle Martin wrote the Cantos, she said. He told the truth as best he could, but there were elements he did not understand.
Me too, I said, and dropped the matter. I walked over and put my arm around Aenea, feeling the subtle changes in her back and shoulder and arm since the first time I had hugged her 4 years earlier. Happy birthday, kiddo. She glanced up at me and then laid her head against my chest.
Thank you, Raul.
There had been other changes in my youthful friend since first we met, when she was just turning 12 standard. I could say that she had grown to womanhood in the intervening years, but despite the rounding of her hips and obvious breasts beneath the old sweatshirt she wore, I still did not see her as a woman. No longer a child, of course, but not yet a woman. She was Aenea. The luminous dark eyes were the same, intelligent, questioning, a bit sad with some secret knowledge, and the effect of being physically touched when she turned the attention of her gaze on you was as strong as ever. Her brown hair had grown somewhat darker in the past few years. She had cut it the previous spring. Now it was shorter than mine had been when I was in the Home Guard military on Hyperion a dozen years earlier. When I set my hand on her head, the hair was barely long enough to rise between my fingers. But I could see some glints of the old blonde streaks there, brought out by the long days she spent working in the Arizona sunlight. As we stood there listening to the blowing dust scraping canvas, Bettik, a silent shadow behind us, Aenea took my hand in both of hers. She might have been 16 that day, a young woman rather than a girl, but her hands were still tiny in my huge palm.
Raul, she said.
I looked at her and waited.
Will you do something for me?
She said softly, very softly. Yes, I did not hesitate. She squeezed my hand and looked directly into me then.
Will you do something for me tomorrow?
Yes. Neither her gaze nor the pressure on my hand let up.
Will you do anything for me?
This time I did hesitate. I knew what such a vow might entail, even though this strange and wonderful child had never asked me to do anything for her, had not asked that I come with her on this mad odyssey. That had been a promise I had made to the old poet, Martin Silenus, before I had even met Aenea. I knew that there were things that I could not, in good conscience or bad, bring myself to do. But foremost among those things I was incapable of doing was denying Aenea. Yes, I said, I will do anything you ask. At that moment, I knew that I was lost and resurrected. Aenea did not speak then, but only nodded, squeezed my hand a final time, and turned back to the light, the cake, and our waiting android friend. On the next day I was to learn what her request truly meant, and how difficult it would be to honor my vow. I will stop for a moment. I realize that you might not know about me unless you have read the first few hundred pages of my tale, which, because I had to recycle the microvellum upon which I wrote them, no longer exists, except in the memory of the scriber. I told the truth in those lost pages, or at least the truth as I knew it then, or at least I tried to tell the truth. Mostly. After having recycled the microvellum pages of that first attempt to tell the story of Aenea, and because the scriber has never been out of my sight, I have to assume that no one has read them. The fact that they were written in a Schrödinger cat box execution egg in exile orbit around the barren world of Armagast, the cat box being little more than a fixed-position energy shell holding my atmosphere, air, and food recycling equipment, bed, table, scriber, and a vial of cyanide gas waiting to be released by a random isotope emission, would seem to have ensured that you have not read those pages. But I am not sure. Strange things were happening then. Strange things have happened since. I will reserve judgment on whether those pages, and these, could ever have been, or ever will be, read. In the meantime, I will reintroduce myself. My name is Raul Endymion, my first name rhyming with tall, which I am, and my last name deriving from the abandoned university city of Endymion on the backwater world of Hyperion. I qualify the word abandoned because that quarantined city is where I met the old poet, Martin Silenus, the ancient author of the banned epic poem The Cantos, and that is where my adventure began. I use the word adventure with some irony, and perhaps in the sense that all of life is an adventure. For it is true that while the voyage began as an adventure, an attempt to rescue 12-year-old Aenea from the Pax and to escort her safely to the distant old Earth, it has since become a full lifetime of love, loss, and wonder. Anyway, at the time of this telling, during the week of the Pope's death, the old architect's death, and Aenea's inauspicious 16th birthday in exile, I was 32 years old, still tall, still strong, still trained mostly in hunting, brawling, and watching others lead, still callow, and just teetering on the precipice of falling forever in love with the girl child I had protected like a little sister, and who, overnight, it seemed, had become a girl-woman whom I knew now as a friend. I should also say that the other things I write of here, the events in Pax Space, the murder of Paul Dore, the retrieval of the female thing named Radamanth Nemes, the thoughts of Father Federico de Soya, are not surmised or extrapolated or made up in the way that the old fiction novels were in Martin Silenus's day. I know these things, down to the level of Father de Soya's thoughts and Counselor Albedo's apparel that day, not because I am omniscient, but because of later events and revelations that gave access to such omniscience. It will make sense later. At least I hope it will. I apologize for this awkward reintroduction. The template for Aenea's cybrid father, a poet named John Keats, said in his last letter of farewell to his friends, "I have always made an awkward bow." In truth, so have I, whether in departure or greeting, or, as is perhaps the case here, in improbable reunion. So I will return to my memories and ask your indulgence if they do not make perfect sense at my first attempt to share and shape them. The wind howled and the dust blew for 3 days and 3 nights after Aenea's 16th birthday. The girl was gone for all that time. Over the past 4 years I had grown used to her time-outs, as she called them, and I usually did not fret the way I had the first few times she had disappeared for days on end. This time, however, I was more concerned than usual. The death of the old architect had left the 27 apprentices and the 60-some support people at the desert camp, which is what the old architect called Taliesin West, anxious and uneasy. The dust storm added to that anxiety, as dust storms always do. Most of the families and support staff lived close by, in one of the desert masonry dormitories Mr. Wright had his interns build south of the main buildings, and the camp complex itself was almost fort-like with its walls and courtyards and covered walkways, good for scuttling between buildings during a dust storm, but each successive day without either sunlight or Aenea made me increasingly nervous. Several times each day I went to her apprentice shelter. It was the farthest from the main compound, almost a quarter of a mile north toward the mountains. She was never there. She had left the door untethered, and a note telling me not to worry, that it was just one of her excursions, and that she was taking plenty of water. But every time I visited, I appreciated her shelter more. 4 years earlier, when she and I had first arrived with a dropship stolen from a Pax warship, both of us exhausted, battered, and burned, not to mention with an android healing in the ship's autosurgeon, the old architect and the other apprentices had greeted us with warmth and acceptance. Mr. Wright had not seemed surprised that a 12-year-old child had come across world after world via farcaster to find him and to ask to be his apprentice. I remember the first day when the old architect had asked her what she knew of architecture. "Nothing," Aenea had replied quietly, "except that you are the one I should learn from." Evidently, this had been the correct response. Mr. Wright had told her that all of the apprentices who had arrived before her, all 26 others, as it turned out, had been asked to design and build their own shelters in the materials from the compound. Canvas, stone, cement, a bit of cast-off lumber, but the design and effort were up to the girl. Before she set to work, not being an apprentice, I made do with a tent close to the main compound. Aenea and I toured the other apprentice shelters. Most were variations on tent shacks. They were serviceable, and some showed style. One particularly exhibited a nice design flair, but, as Aenea pointed out to me, would not keep the sand or rain out with the slightest wind. But none was particularly memorable. Aenea worked 11 days on her shelter. I helped her do some of the heavy lifting and a bit of the excavating. Bettik was still recovering at the time. First in the autosurgeon, then in the compound's infirmary. But the girl did all of the planning and most of the work. The result was this wonderful shelter that I visited 4 times a day during this, her last hiatus in the desert. Aenea had excavated the main sections of the shelter so that most of it was below ground level. Then she had set flagstones in place, making sure that they fit tightly to create a smooth floor. Over the stones she set colorful rugs and blankets she traded for at the Indian market 15 miles away. Around the excavated core of the home she set walls that were about 1 meter high, but with the sunken main room they seemed taller. They were constructed of the same rough desert masonry that Mr. Wright had used in building the walls and superstructure of the main compound buildings, and Aenea used the same technique, although she had never heard him describe it. First, she gathered stones from the desert and the many arroyos and washes around the hilltop compound. The rocks were of every size and color, purple, black, rusty reds, and deep umbers, and some held petroglyphs or fossils. After gathering the stones, Aenea built wooden forms and set the larger rocks with their flat sides against the inside face of the form. She then spent days in the broiling sun, shoveling sand from the washes and carting it back to her building site in wheelbarrows, mixing it there with cement to form the concrete that held the stones in place as the mixture hardened. It was a rough, concrete/stone concoction, desert masonry, Mr. Wright called it, but it was strangely beautiful, the colorful rocks showing through the surface of the concrete, fissures and textures everywhere. Once in place, the walls were about 1 meter high and thick enough to hold out the desert heat in the daytime and hold in the inner heat at night. Her shelter was more complex than it first appeared to the eye. It was months before I appreciated the subtle tricks she had pulled in its design. One duct to enter the vestibule, a stone and canvas porte-cochere with three broad steps leading one down and around to the wood and masonry portal that served as the entrance to the main room. This twisting, descending vestibule acted as a sort of airlock, sealing out the desert sand and harshness, and the way she had rigged the canvas, almost like overlapping jib sails, improved the airlock's effect. The main room was only 3 meters across and 5 long, but it seemed much larger. Aenea had used built-in benches around a raised stone table to create a dining and sitting area, and then placed more niches and stone seats near a hearth she had fashioned in the north wall of the shelter. There was an actual stone chimney built into the wall, and it did not touch the canvas or wood at any point. Between the stone walls and the canvas, at about eye height when seated, she had rigged screened windows that ran the length of the north and south sides of the shelter. These panoramic view slits could be battened down by both canvas and sliding wood shutters, operated from the inside. Overhead, she had used old fiberglass rods found in the compound junk heap to shape the canvas in smooth arches, sudden peaks, cathedral vaults, and odd folded niches. She had actually fashioned a bedroom for herself, again removed the main room... She had actually fashioned a bedroom for herself, again removed from the main room by 2 steps twisted at 60-degree angles, the entire niche built into the gently rising slope and set back against a huge boulder she had found on the site. There was no water or plumbing out here. We all shared the communal showers and toilets in the compound annex, but Aenea had built a lovely little rock basin and bath next to her bed, a plywood platform with mattress and blankets, and several times a week she would heat water from the main kitchen and carry it to her shelter, bucket by bucket, for a hot bath. The light through the canvas ceilings and walls was warm at sunrise, buttery at midday, and orange in the evening. In addition, Aenea had deliberately placed the shelter in careful relation to saguaros, prickly pear bushes, and staghorn cactus, so that different shadows would fall on different panes of canvas at different times of day. It was a comfortable, pleasant place, and empty beyond description when my young friend was absent. I mentioned that the apprentices and support staff were anxious after the old architect's death. Distraught might be a better word. I spent most of those 3 days of Aenea's absence listening to the concerned babble of almost 90 people, never together, since even the dinner shifts in the dining hall were spaced apart because Mr. Wright had not liked huge crowds at dinner, and the level of panic seemed to grow as the days and dust storms went by. Aenea's absence was a big part of the hysteria. She was the youngest apprentice at Taliesin, the youngest person, actually, but the others had grown used to taking advice of her and to listening when she spoke. In 1 week, they had lost both their mentor and their guide. On the 4th morning after her birthday, the dust storms ended, and Aenea returned. I happened to be out jogging just after sunrise and saw her coming across the desert from the direction of the McDowell Mountains. She was silhouetted in the morning light, a thin figure with short hair against the corona brilliance, and in that second I thought of the first time I had seen her in the Valley of the Time Tombs on Hyperion. She grinned when she saw me. "Hey, Boo," she called. It was an old joke based on some book she had read as a very young child. "Hey, Scout," I called back, answering in the same in-joke language. I'm assuming, therefore, it's a To Kill a Mockingbird reference, as you have the protagonist of that book named Scout, and then you have Boo Radley. Yes, that's To Kill a Mockingbird. Right? Boo Radley? I'm pretty sure. Moderately confident. Not 100%. I have self-doubt. I'm pretty confident. We stopped when we were 5 paces apart. My impulse was to hug her and hold her close and beg her not to disappear again. I did not do that. The rich, low lighting of morning threw long shadows behind the... however that... Cholla? Cholla? Cholla, cacti, grease bushes, and sage, and bathed our already sunburned skin in an orange glow. "How are the troops doing?" asked Aenea. I could see that despite her promises to the contrary, she had been fasting during the past 3 days. She had always been thin, but now her ribs almost showed through her thin cotton shirt. Her lips were dry and cracked. "They upset?" she said. "They're shitting bricks," I said. For years I'd avoided using my home guard vocabulary around the kid, but she was 16 now. Besides, she had always used a saltier vocabulary than I knew. Aenea grinned. The brilliant light illuminated the sandy streaks in her short hair. "That'd be good for a bunch of architects, I guess." I rubbed my chin, feeling the rough stubble there. "Seriously, kiddo, they're pretty upset." Aenea nodded. "Yeah, they don't know what to do or where to go now that Mr. Wright's gone." She squinted toward the Fellowship compound, which showed up as little more than asymmetrical bits of stone and canvas, just visible above the cacti and scrub brush. Sunlight glinted off unseen windows and one of the fountains. "Let's get everybody in the music pavilion and talk," said Aenea, and began striding toward Taliesin. And thus began our last full day together on Earth. I'm going to interrupt myself here. I hear my own voice on the scriber and remember the pause in the telling at this point. What I wanted to do here was to tell all about the 4 years of exile on Old Earth, all about the apprentices and the other people at the Taliesin Fellowship, all about the old architect and his whims and petty cruelties, as well as about his brilliance and childlike enthusiasms. I wanted to describe the many conversations with Aenea over those 48 local months, which, as I never got tired of being amazed by, corresponded perfectly to Hegemony Pax Standard months, and my slow growth of understanding of her incredible insights and abilities. Finally, I wanted to tell of all of my excursions during that time. My trip around the Earth in the dropship, the long driving adventures in North America, in North America, my fleeting contact with the other islands of humanity huddled around cybrid figures from the human past. The gathering in Israel and New Palestine around the cybrid Jesus of Nazareth was a memorable group to visit, but primarily, when I hear the brief silence on the scriber that took the place of these tales, I remember the reason for my omission. As I said before, I scribed these words in the Schrödinger cat box orbiting Armagast, while awaiting the simultaneous emission of an isotopic particle and the activation of the particle detector. When these two events coincided, the cyanide gas built into the static energy field around the recycling equipment would be released. Death would not be instantaneous, but near enough. While protesting earlier, I would take my time in telling our story. Aenea's and mine, I realized now that there was some editing, some attempt to get to the important elements before the particle decayed and the gas flowed. I will not double-guess that decision now, except to say that the 4 years on Earth would be worth telling about at some other point in time. The 90 people of the Fellowship were decent, complex, devious, and interesting in the way of all intelligent human beings, and their tales should be told. Similarly, my explorations across Earth, both in the dropship and in the 1948 woody station wagon that the old architect loaned me, might support an epic poem of their own. But I am not a poet. But I was a tracker in my hunting guide days, and my job here is to follow the path of Aenea's growth to womanhood and messiahship without wandering down too many sidetracks. And so I shall. The old architect always referred to the Fellowship compound as Desert Camp. Most of the apprentices referred to it as Taliesin, which means shining brow in Welsh. I was close. Gaelic? Celtic? It's like Welsh. It's nothing like Welsh. Mr. Wright was of Welsh extraction. I spent weeks trying to remember a Pax or Outback world named Welsh before I remembered that the old architect had lived and died before spaceflight. Aenea often referred to the place as Taliesin West, which suggested to even someone as dull as me that there had to be a Taliesin East. When I asked her 3 years earlier, Aenea had explained that the original Mr. Wright had built his first Taliesin Fellowship compound in the early 1930s in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Wisconsin being one of the political and geographical subunits of the ancient North American nation-state called the United States of America. When I asked Aenea if the first Taliesin was like this one, she had said, "Not really. There were a series of Wisconsin Taliesins." Did I say Taliesin again? When I asked Aenea if the first Taliesin was like this one, she had said, "Not really. There were a series of Wisconsin Taliesins, both homes and fellowship compounds, and most were destroyed by fire. That's one of the reasons Mr. Wright installed so many pools and fountains here at this compound, sources of water to fight the inevitable fires." "And his first Taliesin was built in the 1930s? I said. Aenea shook her head. "He opened his first Taliesin Fellowship in 1932. She said, "But that was mostly a way to get slave labor from his apprentices, both for building his dream and raising food for him during the Depression." "What was the Depression?" "Bad economic times in their pure capitalist nation-state," Aenea said. "Remember, the economy wasn't really global then, and it depended upon private money institutions called banks, gold reserves, and the value of physical money. Actual coins and pieces of paper that were supposed to be worth something. It was all a consensual hallucination, of course, and in the 1930s, the hallucination turned nightmare." "Jesus," I said. "Precisely," said Aenea. "Anyway, long before that, in 1909 AD, the middle-aged Mr. Wright abandoned his wife and 6 children and ran away to Europe with a married woman." I admit that I blinked at this news. The thought of the old architect, a man in his mid-80s when we had met him 4 years ago, with a sex life, and a scandalous one at that, took some getting used to. I also wondered what all this had to do with my question about Taliesin East. And if you know something about if you know something about his Frank Lloyd Wright's history, you know it's about to take an interesting / incredibly dark turn. Aenea was getting to that. Oh, yes. I admit that I blinked at this news. The thought of the old architect, a man in his mid-80s when we had met him 4 years ago, with a sex life, and a scandalous one at that, took some getting used to. I also wondered what all this had to do with my question about Taliesin East. Aenea was getting to that. "When he returned with the other woman," she said, smiling at my rapt attention, "he began building the first Taliesin, his home in Wisconsin, for Mama." "His mother?" I said, totally confused. "Mama Borthwick," said Aenea, spelling the first name for me, which is M-A-M-H. Mama. "Mrs. Cheney, the other woman." "Oh." The smile fading, she continued, "The scandal had destroyed his architectural practice and made him a branded man in the United States. But he built Taliesin and forged ahead, trying to find new patrons. His first wife, Catherine, would not give him a divorce. The newspapers, those were databanks printed on paper and distributed regularly, thrived on such gossip and fanned the flames of the scandal, not letting it die." We had been walking in the courtyard when I asked Aenea the simple question about Taliesin, and I remember pausing by the fountain during this part of her answer. I was always amazed at what this child knew. "Then," she said, "on August 15, 1914, a worker at Taliesin went crazy, killed Mama Borthwick and her son John and daughter Martha with a hatchet, burned their bodies, set fire to the compound, and then killed 4 of Mr. Wright's friends and apprentices before swallowing acid himself. The entire place burned down." And I think he hid himself in the furnace or something crazy as well, but I might be misremembering. "My God," I whispered, looking toward the dining hall where the cybrid old architect was having lunch with a few of his oldest apprentices, even as we spoke. "He never gave up," said Aenea. "A few days later, on August 18th, Mr. Wright was touring an artificial lake on the Taliesin property when the dam he was standing on gave way, and he was swept into a rain-swollen creek. Against all odds, he swam out of the torrent. A few weeks later, he started to rebuild." I thought that I understood then what she was telling me about the old architect. Why aren't we at that Taliesin? I asked as we strolled away from the bubbling fountain in the desert courtyard. Aenea shook her head. Good question. I doubt if it even exists in this rebuilt version of Earth. It was important to Mr. Wright, though. He died here, near Taliesin West, on April 9, 1959, but he was buried back near the Wisconsin Taliesin. I stopped walking then. The thought of the old architect dying was a new and disturbing thought. Everything about our exile had been steady state, calm and self-renewing, but now Aenea had reminded me that everything and everyone ends. Or had, before the Pax introduced the cruciform and physical resurrection to humanity. But no one at the Fellowship, perhaps no one on this kidnapped Earth, had submitted to a cruciform. That conversation had been 3 years earlier. This morning, the week after the cybrid old architect's death and incongruous burial in the small mausoleum he had built out in the desert, we were ready to face the consequences of death without resurrection and the end of things. When Aenea went off to the bath and laundry pavilion to wash up, I found Bettik and the two of us got busy with spreading the word of the meeting at the music pavilion, in the music pavilion. The blue-skinned android did not act surprised that Aenea, the youngest of us, was calling and leading the meeting. Both Bettik and I had watched silently over the past few years as the girl became the locus of the fellowship. I jogged from the fields to the dormitories, from the dormitories to the kitchen, where I rang the large bell set in the fanciful bell tower above the stairway to the guest deck. Those apprentices or workers whom I did not contact personally should hear the bell and come to investigate. From the kitchen, where I left cooks and some of the apprentices taking their aprons off and wiping their hands, I announced the meeting to people having coffee in the large fellowship dining room. The view from this beautiful room looked north toward the McDowell Peaks, so some had watched Aenea and me return and knew that something was up. And then I poked my head in Mr. Wright's smaller, private dining room, empty, and then jogged over to the drafting room. This was probably the most attractive room in the compound, with its long rows of drafting tables and filing cabinets set under the sloping canvas roof, the morning light flooding in through the 2 rows of offset windows. The sun was high enough now to fall on the roof, and the smell of heated canvas was as pleasant as the butter-rich light. Aenea had once told me that it was this sense of camping out, of working within the confines of light and canvas and stone, that had been the real reason for Mr. Wright coming west to the second Taliesin. There were 10 or 12 of the apprentices in the drafting room, all standing around, none working now that the old architect was no longer around to suggest projects, and I told them that Aenea would like us to gather in the music pavilion. None protested. None grumbled or made any comment about a 16-year-old telling 90 of her elders to come together in the middle of a workday. If anything, the apprentices looked relieved to hear that she was back and taking charge. From the drafting room I went to the library, where I had spent so many happy hours, and then checked the conference room, lit only by 4 glowing panels in the floor, and announced the meeting to the people I found in both places. Then I jogged down the concrete path under the covered walkway of desert masonry and peered in the cabaret theater where the old architect had loved to show movies on Saturday nights. This place had always tickled me. Its thick stone walls and roof, the long descending space with plywood benches covered with red cushions, the well-worn red carpet on the floor, and the many hundreds of white Christmas lights running back and forth on the ceiling. When we first arrived, Aenea and I were amazed to find that the old architect demanded that his apprentices and their families dress for dinner on Saturday, ancient tuxedos and black ties, of the sort one sees in the oldest history hollows. The women wore strange dresses out of antiquity. Mr. Wright provided the formal clothes for those who failed to bring them in their flight to Earth through the time tombs or farcaster. That first Saturday, Aenea had shown up dressed in a tuxedo, shirt, and black tie, rather than one of the dresses provided. When I saw the old When I saw the old architect's shocked expression, I was sure that he was going to throw us out of the fellowship and make us eke out a living in the desert. But then the old face creased into a smile, and within seconds he was laughing. He never asked Aenea to dress in anything else. After the formal Saturday dinners, we would either have a group musical event or assemble in the cabaret theater for a movie, one of the ancient celluloid kinds that had to be projected by a machine. It was rather like learning to enjoy cave art. Both Aenea and I loved the films he chose, ancient 20th century flat things, many in black and white, and for some reason that he never explained, Mr. Wright preferred to watch them with the soundtrack, optical jiggles and wiggles, visible on the screen. Actually, we'd watched films there for a year before one of the other apprentices told us that they had been made to be watched without the soundtrack visible. Today the cabaret theater was empty, the Christmas lights dark. I jogged on, moving from room to room, building to building, rounding up apprentices, workers, and family members until I met a Bettik by the fountain, and we joined the others in the large music pavilion. The pavilion was a large space, with a broad stage and 6 rows of 18 unupholstered... Sorry, not unupholstered. The pavilion... Sorry. The pavilion was a large space, with a broad stage and 6 rows of 18 upholstered seats in each row. The walls were of redwood painted Cherokee red. The old architect's favorite color, and the usual thick desert masonry. A grand piano and a few potted plants were the only things on the red-carpeted stage. Overhead, stretched tight above a gridwork of wood and steel ribs, was the usual white canvas. Aenea had once told me that after the death of the first Mr. Wright, plastic had taken the place of canvas to relieve the necessity of replacing canvas every couple years. But upon this Mr. Wright's return, the plastic was ripped out, as was the glass above the main drafting room, so that pure light through white canvas would be the rule once again. A. Bettik and I stood near the rear of the music pavilion as the murmuring apprentices and other workers took up their seats, some of the construction workers standing on the aisle steps or at the back with the android and me, as if worried about tracking mud and dust onto the rich carpet and upholstery. When Aenea entered through the side curtains and jumped to the stage, all the conversation stopped. The acoustics were good in Mr. Wright's music pavilion, but Aenea had always been able to project her voice without seeming to raise it. She spoke softly. "Thank you for gathering. I thought we should talk." Jave Peters, one of the older apprentices, immediately stood up in the 5th row. "You were gone, Aenea, in the desert again." The girl on stage nodded. "Did you talk to the lions and tigers and bears?" No one in the audience tittered or giggled. The question was asked in deadly seriousness, and the answer was awaited by 90 people just as seriously. I should explain. It all began in the cantos Martin Silenus wrote more than 2 centuries ago. That tale of the Hyperion pilgrims, the Shrike, and the battle between humanity and the Technocore explained how the early cyberspace webs had evolved into planetary dataspheres. By the time of the hegemony, the AI Technocore had used their secret farcaster and fatline technologies to weave hundreds of dataspheres into a single, secret, interstellar information medium called the Megasphere. But according to the Cantos, Aenea's father, the cybrid John Keats, had traveled in disembodied data persona form to the Megasphere's core and discovered that there was a larger datum plane medium, perhaps larger than our galaxy, which even the core AIs were afraid to explore because it was full of, quote, lions and tigers and bears, unquote. Those were the AI's words. These were the beings, or intelligences, or gods for all we knew, who had kidnapped the Earth and brought it here before the core could destroy it a millennium ago. These lions and tigers and bears were the bugaboo guardians of our world. No one in the Fellowship had ever seen any of these entities, or spoken to them, or had any solid evidence of their existence. No one except Aenea. "No," said the girl on stage, "I didn't talk to them." She looked down as if embarrassed. She was always reticent to talk about this, but I think I heard them.
They spoke to you?
Said Jave Peters. The pavilion was hushed. No, said Aenea, I didn't say that. I just heard them. A bit like when you overhear someone else's conversation through a dormitory wall. There was a rustle of amusement at this. For all the thick stone walls on the Fellowship property, the dorm partitions were notably thin. All right, said Betts Kimball from the first row. Betts was the chief cook and a large, sensible woman. Tell us what they did. Aenea stepped up to the edge of the red-carpeted stage and looked out at her elders and colleagues. I can tell you this, she said softly, there'll be no more food and supplies from the Indian market. That's gone. It was as if she had set off a grenade in the music pavilion. When the babble began to subside, one of the biggest of the construction workers, a man named Hassan, shouted over the noise, "What do you mean it's gone? Where do we get our food?" There was good reason for the panic. In Mr. Wright's day, way back in the 20th century, his Fellowship desert camp had been about 50 kilometers from a large town called Phoenix. Unlike the Depression-era Wisconsin Taliesin, where apprentices raised crops in the rich soil even while they worked on Mr. Wright's construction plans, this desert camp had never been able to grow its own food. So they drove to Phoenix and bartered or paid out their primitive coins and paper money for basic supplies. The old architect had always depended upon the largesse of patrons, large loans never to be paid back, for such month-to-months for survival. Here, in our reassembled desert camp, there were no towns. The only road, 2 gravel ruts, led west into hundreds of miles of emptiness. I knew this because I had flown over the area in the dropship and driven it in the old architect's ground car. But about 30 clicks from the compound there was a weekly Indian market where we had bartered craft items for food and basic materials. It had been there for years before Aenea's and my arrival. Everyone had obviously expected it to be there forever. "What do you mean it's gone?" repeated Hassan in a hoarse shout. "Where'd the Indians go? Were they just cybrid illusions like Mr. Wright?" Aenea made a gesture with her hands that I had grown accustomed to over the years, a graceful setting-aside motion that I had come to see as a physical analog of the Zen expression mu, which, in the right context, can mean unask the question. "The market's gone because we won't need it anymore," said Aenea. "The Indians are real enough, Navajo, Apache, Hopi, and Zuni, but they have their own lives to live, their own experiments to conduct. Their trading with us has been a favor." The crowd became angry at that, but eventually they settled down again. Betts Kimball stood. "What do we do, child?" Aenea sat on the edge of the stage as if trying to become one with the waiting, expectant audience. "The Fellowship is over," she said. "That part of our lives has to end." One of the younger apprentices was shouting from the back of the pavilion. "No, it doesn't. Mr. Wright could still return. He was a cybrid, remember? A construct. The core, or the lions and tigers and bears, whoever shaped him can send him back to us." Aenea shook her head, sadly but firmly. "No, Mr. Wright is gone. The Fellowship is over. Without the food and materials the Indians brought from so far away, this desert camp can't last a month. We have to go." It was a young female apprentice named Perret who spoke quietly into the silence. "Where, Aenea?" Perhaps it was at this moment that I first realized how this entire group had given themselves over to the young woman I had known as a child. When the old architect was around, giving lectures, holding forth in seminars and drafting-room bull sessions, leading his flock on picnics and swimming outings in the mountains, demanding solicitude and the best food, the reality of Aenea's leadership had been somewhat masked. But now it was evident. "Yes," someone else called from the center of the rising rows of seats. "Where, Aenea?" My friend opened her hands in another gesture. Excuse me. I need to tighten the screw on this thing. Microphone just bobbled away. My friend opened her hands in another gesture I had learned. Rather than unask the question, this one said, "You must answer your own question." Aloud, she said, "There are two choices. Each of you traveled here either by Farcaster or through the Time Tombs. You can go back by way of Farcaster." "No! How can we?" "Never! I'd rather die!" "No! The Pecks will find us and kill us!" The cries were immediate and from the heart. It was the sound of terror made verbal. I smelled fear in the room the way I used to smell it on animals caught in leg traps on the moors of Hyperion. Aenea lifted a hand and the outcries faded. "You can return to Pax Space by Farcaster, or you can stay on Earth and try to fend for yourself." There were murmurs, and I could hear a relief at the option of not returning. I understood that feeling. The Pax had come to be a bogeyman to me as well. The Pax had come to be a bogeyman to me as well. The thought of returning there sent me gasping up out of sleep at least once a week. "But if you stay here," continued the girl seated on the edge of Mr. Wright's music stage, "you will be outcasts. All of the groups of human beings here are involved in their own projects, their own experiments. You will not fit in there." People shouted questions about that, demanding answers to mysteries not understood during their long stay here. But Aenea continued with what she was saying. "If you stay here, you will waste what Mr. Wright has taught you, and what you came to learn about yourself. The Earth does not need you, and what you came... the Earth does not need architects and builders. Not now. We have to go back." Jave Peters spoke again. His voice was brittle, but not angry. "And does the Pax need builders and architects to build its cross-damned churches?" "Yes," said Aenea. Jave pounded the back of the seat in front of him with his large fist. "But they'll capture or kill us if they learn who we are, where we've been." "Yes," said Aenea. Betts Kimball said, "Are you going back, child?" "Yes," said Aenea, and pushed herself away from the stage. Everyone was standing now, shouting or talking to the people next to them. It was Jave Peters who spoke the thoughts of the 90 Fellowship orphans. "Can we go with you, Aenea?" The girl sighed, her face as sunburned and alert as it... Oh, yeah, okay. I didn't read far enough ahead on that sentence, my bad. The girl sighed, her face as sunburned and alert as it looked this morning, also looked tired. "No," she said, "I think that leaving here is like dying or being born. We each have to do it alone," she smiled, "or in very small groups." The room fell silent again. The room fell silent then. When Aenea spoke, it was as if a single instrument were picking up where the orchestra had stopped. "Raul will leave first," she said, "tonight. One by one, each of you will find the right Farcaster portal. I will help you. I will be the last to leave Earth. But leave I will, and within a few weeks. We all must go." People pushed forward then, still silent, but moving closer to the girl with the short cropped hair. "But some of us will meet again," said Aenea. "I feel certain that some of us will meet again." I heard the flip side of that reassuring prediction. Some of us would not survive to meet again. "Well," boomed Betts Kimball, standing with one broad arm around Aenea, "we have enough food in the kitchen for one last feast. Lunch today will be a meal you'll remember for years. If you have to travel, as my mum used to say, never travel on an empty stomach. Who's to help me in the kitchen then?" The groups broke up then, families and friends in clusters, loners standing as if stunned, everyone moving closer to Aenea as we began everyone moving closer to Aenea as we began filing out of the music pavilion. I wanted to grab her at that moment, shake her until her wisdom teeth fell out, and demand, "What the hell do you mean, Raul will leave first, tonight? Who the hell are you to tell me to leave you behind? And how do you think you can make me? But she was too far away, and too many people were pressing around her. The best I could do was stride along behind the crowd as it moved toward the kitchen and dining area, anger written in my face, fists, muscles, and walk. Once I saw Aenea glance back, straining to find me over the heads of the crowd around her, and her eyes pleaded, "Let me explain." I stared back stonily, giving her nothing. It was almost dusk when she joined me in the large garage Mr. Wright had ordered built half a click east of the compound. The structure was open on the sides, except for canvas curtains, but it had thick stone columns supporting a permanent redwood roof. It had been built to shelter the dropship in which Aenea, Bettik, and I had arrived. I had pulled back the main canvas door and was standing in the open hatch of the dropship when I saw Aenea crossing the desert toward me. On my wrist was the comlog bracelet that I had not worn in more than a year. The thing held much of the memory of our former spaceship, the consul's ship from centuries ago, and it had been my liaison and tutor when I had learned to fly the dropship. I did not need it now. The comlog memory had been downloaded into the dropship, and I had become rather good at piloting the dropship on my own, but it made me feel more secure. The comlog was also running a systems check on the ship, chatting with itself, you might say. Chatting with itself, you might say. Aenea stood just within the folded canvas. The sunset threw long shadows behind her and painted the canvas red. "How's the dropship?" she said. I glanced at the comlog readings. "All right," I grunted, not looking her way. "Does it have enough fuel and charge for one more flight?" Still not looking up, fiddling with touch plates on the arm of the pilot's chair inside the hatch, I said, "Depends on where it's flying to." Aenea walked to the dropship stairway and touched my leg. "Raul?" This time I had to look at her. "Don't be angry," she said. "We have to do these things." I pulled my leg away. "God damn it, don't keep telling me and everyone else what we have to do. You're just a kid. Maybe there are things some of us don't have to do. Maybe going off on my own and leaving you behind is one of those." I stepped off the ladder and tapped the comlog. The stairs morphed back into the dropship hull. I left the garage and began walking toward my tent. On the horizon, the sun was a perfect red sphere. In the last low rays of light, the stones and canvas of the main compound looked as if they had caught fire, the old architect's greatest fear. "Raul, wait!" Aenea hurried to catch up to me. One glance in her direction told me how exhausted she was. All afternoon she had been meeting with people, talking to people, explaining to people, reassuring people, hugging people. I had come to think of the Fellowship as a nest of emotional vampires, and Aenea as their only source of energy. "You said that you would—" she began. Yeah, I interrupted. I suddenly had the sense that she was the adult and that I was the petulant child. To hide my confusion, I turned away again and watched the last of the sunset. For a moment or two we were both silent, watching the light fade and the sky darken. I had decided that Earth sunsets were slower and more lovely than the Hyperion sunsets I had known as a child, and that desert sunsets were particularly fine. How many sunsets had this child and I shared in the past 4 years? How many lazy evenings of dinner and conversation under the brilliant desert stars? Could this really be the last sunset we would watch together? The idea made me sick and furious. "Raul," she said again when the shadows had grown together and the air was cooling, "will you come with me?" I did not say yes, but I followed her across the rocky field, avoiding the bayonet spikes of yucca and the spines of low cacti in the gloom, until we came into the lighted area of the compound. How long, I wondered, until the fuel oil for the generators runs out? This answer I knew. It was part of my job to keep the generators maintained and fueled. We had 6 days' supply, in the main tanks and another 10 days in the reserve tanks that were never to be touched except in an emergency. With the Indian market gone, there would be no resupply. Almost 3 weeks of electric lights and refrigeration and power equipment, and then... what? Darkness, decay, and an end to the incessant construction, tearing down, and rebuilding that had been the background noise at Taliesin for the last 4 years. I thought perhaps that we were going to the dining hall, but... excuse me.
My diaphragm. It rebels.
I thought perhaps that we were going to the dining hall, but we walked past those lighted windows, groups of people still sitting at the tables, talking earnestly, glancing up with eyes only for Aenea as we passed. I was invisible to them in their hour of panic. And then we approached Mr. Wright's private drafting studio and his office, but we did not stop there. Nor did we stop in the beautiful little conference room where a small group sat to watch a final movie. 3 weeks until the movie projectors did not run, nor did we turn into the main drafting room. Our destination was a stone and canvas workshop set far down the driveway on the south side, a useful outbuilding for working with toxic chemicals or noisy equipment. I had worked here often in the first couple of years after at the fellowship, but not in recent months. Bettik was waiting at the door. The android had a slight smile on his bland, blue face, rather like the one he had worn when carrying the birthday cake to Aenea's surprise party. "What?" I said, still irritated, looking from the girl's tired face to the android's smug expression. Aenea stepped into the workshop and turned on the light. On the work table in the center of the little room sat a small boat, not much more than 2 meters in length. It was shaped rather like a seed sharpened on both ends, enclosed except for a single round cockpit opening with a nylon skirt that could obviously be tightened around the occupant's waist. A 2-bladed paddle lay on the table next to the boat. I stepped closer and ran my hand over the hull, a polished fiberglass compound with internal aluminum braces and fittings. Only one other person at the fellowship could do such careful work. I looked at Bettik almost accusingly. He nodded. "It's called a kayak," said Aenea, running her own hand over the polished hull. "It's an old Earth design." "I've seen variations on it," I said, refusing to be impressed. "The Ice Claw Ursus rebels used small boats like this." Aenea was still stroking the hull, all of her attention there. It was as if I had not spoken. "I asked Bettik to make it for you," she said. "He's worked for weeks here." "For me," I said dully. My stomach tightened at the realization of what was coming. Aenea moved closer. She was standing directly under the hanging light, and the shadows under her eyes and cheekbones made her look much older than 16. "We don't have the raft anymore, Raul." I knew the raft she meant. The one that had carried us across so many worlds until it was chopped up in the ambush that almost killed us on God's Grove. The raft that had carried us down the river under the ice on Sol Draconi Septum, and through the deserts of Hebron and Comriad, and across the world ocean of Mare Infinitus. I knew the raft she meant, and I knew what this boat meant. "So I'm to take this back the way we came?" I raised a hand as if to touch the thing, but then did not. "Not the way we came," said Aenea, "but down the river Tethys, across different worlds, across as many worlds as it takes to find the ship." "The ship?" I said. We had left the consul's spaceship hiding under a river, repairing itself from damage sustained in our flight from the Pax, on a world whose name and location we did not know. My young friend nodded, and the shadows fled, then regrouped around her tired eyes. "We'll need the ship, Raul. If you would, I'd like you to take this kayak down the river Tethys until you find the ship, then fly back with it to a world where Bettik and I will be waiting." "A world in Pax space?" I said, my stomach tightening another notch at the danger present in that simple sentence. "Yes." "Why me?" I said, looking significantly at Bettik. I was ashamed at my thought then, Why send a human being, your best friend, when the android can go? I lowered my gaze. It will be a dangerous trip, said Aenea. I believe that you can do it, Raul. I trust you to find the ship and then find us. I trust you to find the ship and then find us. I felt my shoulders slump. All right, I said. Do we head back to where we came through the Farcaster before? We had come through from God's Grove on a small stream near the old architect's masterpiece building, Falling Water. It was 2/3 of a continent away. No, said Aenea. Closer, on the Mississippi River. All right, I said again. I had flown over the Mississippi. It was almost 2,000 clicks east of here. When do I go? Tomorrow? Aenea touched my wrist. No, she said tiredly but firmly. Tonight. Right now. I did not protest. I did not argue. Without speaking, I took the bow of the kayak, Bettik took the stern, Aenea held the center steady, and we carried the damned thing back to the dropship in the deepening desert night. And that is where we'll call it for today. This grand start to the grand start of the Rise of Endymion, and another road trip, sort of. Even more road trippy, actually. Sorry about the little cut in service there. I crossed the streams. It is a sensitive microphone. The cable is sensitive. It is not well insulated. I should probably get something that's better for that. Anyway, there is much book ahead of us. How long did that take? Like, almost 2.5 hours? Yeah. That was not as many pages as I would have thought it was, but we got through. Where are you? There we are. It's a chunk. It's a chunklet. Another 9 or 10 of those, and we might actually finish this puppy. Anyway, yeah, we've got a lot more to go. It was closer to 2 hours, I take it back. Anyway. Let me flip ahead here. The first couple chapters are really long, and then they're going to shorten a bit more back to something a bit more familiar from the rest of the book. I can do a little more than that, I imagine. Plot the bookmark there for now. It's probably pretty close. Here we go. Yeah, probably pretty good. We will be doing more reading this week. It looks like I'll have Wednesday and Friday free. So it's almost like gold times. Let me see how long the chapter after that one is. If that chapter's really long, yeah, we'll leave it at that for now. We might do another extra chapter afterwards on Wednesday. Anyway, thunk. Book weighs a ton. I should probably weigh that puppy. It is maybe not the largest book I have in my collection in terms of raw page count and size, but it is a hefty boy. Oh yeah, no, I have a dictionary, a couple dictionaries floating around for starters, but those don't count. There's one or two that are just beastly. Also has nothing weight-wise on any of the trade hardcover comic book collections I have occasionally, because coated paper is just a very heavy son of a gun. I would like to get around to reading some more comics on stream. I'll probably do the first story arc or two of Finder by Carla Speed McNeil, because I've been wanting to do that on stream for a while. It's good stuff. There is some violence and sexy time, but it is not terribly graphic. Mostly it's about story. It's really good. I kind of wish she'd do more of it, but I know she's got a life to live. She does still do stuff, but it's mostly, I think, commission work now.
She's not like writing, I don't think, for any imprint regularly. Let me check that, because I might be very wrong. Where are you? Carla Speed McNeil. Has she done anything lately? Oh, she did Filth of the City in Transmetropolitan? How did I miss that? Huh. I think I might have actually known that. And I'm only remembering now. Okay, it says 1997 to present. I don't know that that's true. Oh, no, they've actually... She has come out with a couple in the intervening years. And now in color... Interesting. Oh, okay. So she has actually done a couple additional storylines here that I will have to find. I'll do that. Good stuff is what I'm saying. It's well worth it. She wears her influences on her sleeve. She even has, I think, like at the back, like an annotated list of footnotes. That kind of is like, here's all my influences. Here's a bunch of gonzo stuff I've got going on. And some of it actually expands on... some of it expands on the background lore, because she's got a pretty well fleshed out world. There's a lot going on, but it's pretty well fleshed out. Highly recommend if you can find Finder. Any of them really. They all each arc stands on its own pretty well. You don't need a ton of additional context. There are some that have like a part 1 and a part 2. Not too many though. And they're usually a collected number of issues. Like part 1 is entitled Sin Eater, and that has 2 parts. There's a part 1 and a part 2, and part 1 is like issues 1 through 7, and part 2 is like 8 through 14. That's probably the story arc I would cover first, and then just follow everything after that I've got. But I'm definitely going to have to get some more of what she's done and go from there. They're in black and white. They are gonna sketch drawn. They're very good art nonetheless. Quite detailed, evocative even. So I do want to get around to doing that. So I'll probably I might do that this year. Again, all this is going to be after Cytine and Regenesis, which are the higher priority after completing Endymion, the Rise of Endymion. Anything else important and salient? I don't know. If I do the comic stuff, it'll be like a read-along thing where I'll have it up on screen, so I've got to make sure I've got digital copies of all of these, which I should. I know Finder I got around, the Finder library I got digital copies of, so. Graphic novels, if you will, if that has more cachet than comic books. I use the term frequently. I use the terms interchangeably. I don't bag on people for reading comics. I think there's a lot of dumb comics out there. I think there's a lot of dumb everything out there. I think there's a lot of really, really well done comics. There was one for Aquaman from a couple years back that was really good. Or at least interesting. It was clearly homaging Peter Watts. I think it was Aquaman Andromeda, I want to say. With a bit of Lovecraftian shenanigans that happens towards the end. It was pretty good. It was pretty good. Would recommend. Very interesting art design. I forget, probably my bud in New York probably was the one who recommended that to me. I'm not actually sure. He's given me some good recos. Some really good recommendations over the years. Mostly for music, but occasionally some really good graphic novel stuff. Anyway, where was I? Right. So this will be another, I don't know, 10 to 12 installments, I'm guessing, based on how far we got. And if we're getting like three-ish, between 2 and 3 streams a week, that'll be basically another month. If we can finish this before the end of February, I will fast-track getting Ring Shout started. It's relatively short. That is by... Oh, what is their name? I can't remember their name. I do want to read Ring Shout as a Black History Month thing. It's, shall we say, cathartic. If not terribly pleasant, though. Like, really bad things happen to a bunch of people who do fucking deserve it, actually. Bad things happen to some people that don't deserve it, but mostly it's bad things to people who do. I'll let you imagine from there on out. There was another one that was pretty... Trouble the Saints is another one I'd kind of like to do at some point. That one's also fairly interesting. I do want to do some N.K. Jemisin at some point, but I don't know when that'll be, because that'll be kind of a hefty undertaking, because she likes writing in series, and I kind of want to do the whole thing. Mostly I have to just reread the stuff that I have by her so that I can remember anything. But yeah, no, lots of individual stuff. We'll do some Greg Egan throughout the year, for sure. For sure, we'll do some more Egan. And I'll find some nice, interesting, fun stuff. This is probably the year that I will do Space Opera, the book, called Space Opera. In space, no one can hear you sing. It's excellent. I thoroughly enjoyed my first read-through of it, and I'm going to enjoy my second when I get around to doing that. Let's see. Let me check YouTube comments and get caught up on those. Oh, God. Oh, God. What do we got? Okay. Some of these I've read and responded to. I don't always respond to them, but I do always read them. Okay. Brandon Labby 3577 says, "Hey, my dude, I'm glad you're still active. I wonder if there's a tiny glitch with your channel. I should click on the videos tab and sort by latest and see this one from a month ago, but one from a year ago, and the rest from 3 years ago or more. But I know you have videos in between because your acceptance readings are from 2 years ago." Oh, yes, I responded to this one. Anyway, more importantly, I wanted to say how much I appreciate your readings of the Southern Reach series. I'll be honest and admit that I was just looking for free audiobooks of the series on here, and your reading series came up, but you read it perfectly. I have an Audible subscription, but I heard their preview of Annihilation, and it wasn't nearly as good. High praise. If it wouldn't be too much trouble, I'd like to humbly request that you read the latest book in the series, Absolution. I'll gladly donate to a Patreon or Ko-fi or whatever you might have. I hope you're still doing well, and I'm very glad to see you're still active. So I responded accordingly. You'll want to check the live or playlists tabs. That's where all the action is. It's the way YouTube categorizes streams that haven't been downloaded, then re-uploaded, which would put them into the videos section. Which these all are, since I'm too much of a bum to go editing them after the fact, hence the ellipsis performance art aspect. As for Absolution, I've got some good news and bad news. Bad news, I'm not going to do it. Because good news I already did. It's all there in the playlists. Knock yourself out and enjoy the ride. It looks like I haven't gotten around to plopping it into the Southern Reach Area X playlist, so there's a separate Absolution playlist for it here, which I linked. And then he said, "My dude, the way my heart dropped and then immediately leapt when you said you wouldn't do it because you did. I love you, you're amazing." Adulation. We take that. We take the ego stroking. Let's see. That's somebody doing an emote. Probably him, actually. Oh, yes. So there was a kerfuffle with Artemis by Andy Weir. Apparently, I didn't have part 4 in the playlist. I might have accidentally put it in another one and forgot to put it in 2. It wouldn't be the first time that I've goofed. Anyway, thank you to Nobody No Nope. telling me that it was goofed. I think I've got that fixed now. Part 3 finished with Chapter 7. This starts with Chapter 9. Chapter 8 was skipped. I might... Actually, he has another short Part 4 video. I might have to go and re-record part of that. And I'll take time. I'll try and find time during the week to check that out when I'm not working. And I'll see if I can get something there. Or see if, like, I accidentally deleted it off the channel and I have to re-upload it or something. I'll try and figure that out. What else? Merlin526 says, on Authority Part 3, hi, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to read through these books. I've been interested in them for years, but it's hard to find reasonably priced English language print books that aren't mega popular and or annoyingly expensive in Japan. And for some reason, audio rights for the Southern Reach books seem to be weird in Japan, too. I stumbled on your readings yesterday. I've deeply enjoyed getting to listen to these stories through them. You've got a great vocal range and cadence. The live flubs and anecdotes only add to the experience in my estimation. Thank you, and thank you, Merlin526, from Japan. Which means if you're trying to catch these live, they are actually in the dead of night for you, so don't do that. Here we go. And Richie Bray from 14 hours ago. What do I do now? Just recently found this channel and just had to say I love it. I found it after getting Diaspora on Audible and immediately stopped listening since the narration was absolutely horrible. But when looking online, I found someone mentioned you did similar stories. How are you so much better at narration than the guy narrating 41 books professionally? I'm not doing it for money, maybe? I don't know. I'd love to. If you can send me, like, a link, Richie Bray, I'm going to type a response to that real quick. If the audio cuts out, it's because I hit the Y key. Don't go cruising. Trawling, sorry. Trawling the net, searching for... with the broader internet discussion? I don't know. I'm not writing an essay, but it sounds like I am, I swear. Thanks for tuning in, Optical Antenna, and thanks for tuning in, oh gosh, I'm going to struggle with that name. I'm so sorry. It's because the font on mine shrinks as the name gets longer. That's really weird. I'm going to have to tweak that. Siddharth Yadav, 8576. Thanks for tuning in. I will, again, look into the Wheel of Time series. I know of it. I have read one book out of it, and I think it was partway through, and I kind of bounced off it, but haven't gone and revisited, and I'll have to do that at some point. Anyway, yeah. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. I just realized it's still rolling while I respond to a comment, getting very intent and clickety-clacketing away with my mechanical keyboard that I really do probably have to replace at some point in the near future. Anyway, so yeah, this Wednesday. Wednesday, January 28th. Ooh, I did not catch the date. I will try to I'll have to do one short that day, because I have another commitment on the 28th, and I didn't realize that was Wednesday. I'll get a short one in this Wednesday. Friday will be as normal. After that, I'll find out what my schedule is, and go from there for next week. Work is fun. Extra added responsibilities on top of what I was doing before, I should say, is fun. It's why my voice has dropped like 2 octaves over the last 3 months. Ahem. Yep. Okie doke. I will see you all then. I guess for Rise of Endymion, I'll keep the slideshow for covers. If I find any more, I'll throw them in there. Anyway, until next time, stay safe, stay sane, be